It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "No, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Dubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you.
She's only teasing. Go on.
He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one.
Let's respectfully.
And welcome to GB News Live with me, Mark Longhurst. Let's take you live to Dublin because the President has arrived in his motorcade, Joe Biden, on his way to meet the Irish President, Michael D. Higgins. These the scenes at Phoenix Park in the city. The President running about half an hour late, so as we can see there, everyone else is catching up to try and make up the clock. And we've got the Beast arriving, the presidential Cadillac, the bomb-proof, bulletproof and gas-proof limousine with the various other outriding vehicles. Guard of honour there waiting for the US president. And we are being told that there will be a private meeting with the Irish president, Michael D. Higgins. But they will also ring the peace bell and also clearly discuss the situation north of the border, as indeed they will on US and Irish relations, because there's a meeting too, the Taoiseach, Leo Varadkar, and then a meeting, or at least an address of the joint session of the Irish Parliament to discuss Irish-US cooperation on, we're told, peace, prosperity and security. 9 members of the US Congress and 1 senator with the presidential party. And also, interestingly, we're being told that in that audience at the Parliament building will be Gerry Adams, the former president of Sinn Féin, and indeed Michelle O'Neill, Sinn Féin's leader in Stormont, because, of course, that was the political focus yesterday of events in Northern Ireland, but the focus now in the Republic. But clearly this effort to try and improve relations will be part of the political narrative today. And we are being told that certainly in terms of the president, he will again talk about the importance of US investment in the island of Ireland, both north and south of the border. And just in terms of the pictures, also attending a youth Gaelic sports demonstration a little later. Well, we have Tom in the studio with us once more to mark another historic event. They're running a bit behind time, and clearly he's got a lot to fit in today, because it's Michael D. Higgins, it's Leo Varadkar, it's the joint session of the Parliament, and, as we said, a Gaelic sports demonstration.
Absolutely, a busy calendar for the President of the United States. But yes, running around half an hour late as things stand. We're just waiting to see where the President himself will emerge. Haven't seen him yet. And, of course, we don't quite know where Michael D. Higgins is, where he will be receiving the President. We can see some of the motorcade there.
Once already from the official residence. Clearly, the timings have gone slightly awry.
It's very hard to spot Michael D. Higgins because he's about 2 feet tall.
Yes, I know.
So that's always a bit of a question mark. But
a guard of honour there as well. I mean, I wonder whether the President now will have to maybe miss actually inspecting the guard just to try and catch up with the timetable, given obviously how tight these things are.
It's a possibility, but looking at the way that the weather is actually treating the whole party very, very nicely today, perhaps they'll want to bask in some of that sunshine. But this is a significant moment for Ireland. Of course, we all know, we've spoken endlessly about how Irish Joe Biden sees himself as. This trip isn't just about the politics today, but also later on seeing some of those ancestral parts of the country where Joe Biden's ancestors came from whence they then migrated to the United States of America, as over 6 million Irish individuals have done in the last 2 centuries. Big, close ties between these countries emphasised today.
It's interesting how relaxed this all is. Everyone arriving on foot. As we say, we've got the members of the Irish Defence Forces and a military band forming up outside the Áras an Uachtaráin, and apologies for my pronunciation there, the Gaelic, the official residence for President Michael D. Higgins, which is there in its white glory. Sort of echoes a little bit with the portico there of the White House.
Certainly, Joe Biden will be feeling much at home, although it is a little bit smaller than the White House, it must be said, without quite as many wings, and I would very much doubt that it had any nuclear bunkers. But this is, of course, a big moment, and Joe Biden, in emphasising investment, has a fairly consistent message, actually, both north and south of the border. He was talking yesterday about how the dividends of peace have brought about greater investment and security in Northern Ireland, and how a restored executive could bring further American investment.
Well, and a tripling of GDP, he said, in terms of the carrot, if you like, to move the political process forward.
Quite remarkable figures. I'm not quite sure how he stood those up, but certainly...
A wish list, maybe, a wish list.
Perhaps, but it is a consistent message, both north and south of the border, talking about that potential US investment, talking about the economic opportunities that are before them.
The other consistent message, of course, is this effort by the US National Security Council Senior Director Amanda Sloat, who's had to keep speaking to reporters about this sort of indication that this is an anti-UK, pro-Irish president. And in terms of the visit to Belfast, saying Joe Biden was not kept away from people in Northern Ireland, even though it was a briefer stop than his visit to the Republic. But clearly there will be parallels drawn with what's being seen here in Dublin and what was seen, or not seen rather, in Belfast.
A big point of the Belfast visit was, of course, Stormont, that enormous palace. Again, a big white old building that currently sits, for want of a better word, vacant. Obviously not vacant, but without an executive over the governance there. It's a big contrast, really. All of the regalia, the sort of state occasion in the Republic, and a visit to a university for a little over an hour yesterday in Northern Ireland. It's a big contrast how Joe Biden has all of the bells and whistles of state ceremony in the Republic, but in Northern Ireland it was a much more muted affair.
Do we take it that if Stormont had been sitting, there would have been a different balance, that there would have been more for him to have seen and said and actually engaged with? I mean, he obviously did meet the leaders of the 5 political parties.
Very briefly before his Ulster University speech, but I think it is undoubtedly the case that had Stormont been sitting, we would have seen an address to that legislative chamber.
Now, here's an interesting detail that they've given us, and that is that Sinn Féin's leader in Stormont, Michelle O'Neill, will be in this parliamentary address today in the audience, as will the former president of Sinn Féin, Gerry Adams, which is a little controversial.
It is a little controversial. Of course, Sinn Féin is an all-Ireland party, as they describe themselves.
Just to alert you, if you're listening on radio, the presidential motorcade is now on the move. Sorry, Tom, you're just about to indicate, of course, the significance of the various political signals today as the President arrives.
Yes, we must not forget that Sinn Féin is not just a party in Northern Ireland, it also stands in elections in the Republic. Currently, opinion polls suggest it's leading. It may well be the next Taoiseach of the Republic, could well be a Sinn Féin politician.
Well, we have the red carpet, and there is indeed Michael D. Higgins, who has emerged for the second time, had a bit of a dress rehearsal earlier at the allotted time, but clearly, as Tom was saying, the presidential party now running about, I think 37 minutes late to be exact, but clearly in terms of the time slipping, it's an awful lot to try and fit in. And in addition to this formal welcome by the President of Ireland, the President will be meeting Leo Varadkar, as well as the other political leaders at the parliamentary buildings in the centre of Dublin. We're just waiting to see the band is going to strike up. No, silence at the moment, but the flag is flying, the tricolour, and blue skies, dotted clouds, much better than, of course, the storms that meant he had to, I think, actually leave a trip on the helicopter, Marine One, then, when he was due to leave Belfast. That's why they stayed in the motor. And there is the President with his sunglasses on, as befits the weather conditions, and the handshake. A few words of welcome. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I think we can ascertain with our lip reading. And I think this is more akin, Tom, to an official state visit than from what we saw, indeed, in Belfast.
It certainly is. This is a much grander affair. You've got all of the sort of elements of the state, not just the most ceremonial part here with the President, but, of course, then on to meet the Taoiseach and then on to see the Parliament. And there's an interesting element about the visit to the Parliament as well that we have not yet mentioned, which is that Biden will be accompanied by the wife of his favourite Irish poet, Seamus Heaney.
Yeah.
And Marie Heaney will be accompanying him into the Irish Parliament, which is a really poignant moment because, of course, Irish poetry has meant so much to Joe Biden, particularly in his formative years. He used it to get over his stammer, he's said in multiple interviews.
So close to his heart. And I think he's got his sister with him once more, his son Hunter as well, in addition to these 9 members of the US Congress, a senator as well. And, of course, in terms of the welcome at the Parliament, we've got Bertie Ahern, Enda Kenny, as well as all the other political leaders. But I think the Guard is about to come to attention. Wonderful scene there in Phoenix Park in Dublin. And clearly Dublin itself has been, like Belfast, sharing the various security concerns, but a little bit more relaxed in terms of the Garda, we're being told, unlike Police Service in Northern Ireland, still trying to get to the bottom of that security leak yesterday, which, of course, caused some alarm.
But, of course, this is a very impressive house, actually older than the White House. This residence of the President, I'm not going to attempt it in Irish, Arish and O'Connor, literally translates as residence of the President, was previously the Vice-Regal Lodge, and before that it was actually the residence of the park ranger of the park, who was an amateur architect, and clearly not particularly amateur, looking at the impressive nature of this building that was constructed back in the 1780s. The 1750s. So before the United States was a country, this house was constructed.
Yeah, and interesting, of course, that in his address to the Ulster University, Biden was referring to the role of the design of the White House and indeed John Dunlop being a signatory of the Declaration of Independence, trying to sort of go through the shared history, not just of Ireland, but also I think he talked about Scottish, Northern Irish, and his roots going back to Nottingham. So clearly trying to address some of these comments being made about Biden being anti-UK, as some have asserted.
Yes, and clearly the White House was pushing back on that comment yesterday. I do have to say, I don't think it's particularly fair necessarily to say that Biden has always been consistently anti-British. He's obviously very, very proud of his Irish heritage. I think there are many examples where he's perhaps made some anti-British jokes, but also looking at his record on the Foreign Affairs Committee in the Senate. He has said that the United Kingdom is America's closest ally. He has stood up for the United Kingdom in his Senate career on multiple occasions, perhaps most notably in 1982, when he sponsored a motion to make sure that the United States was actually coming down on the side of the United Kingdom in the Falklands War at a time when the administration was wanting to be a sort of negotiating hand impartially.
And obviously much today about relations between Ireland and the US. But what about our special relationship? With all this comment about the very quick shared cup of tea that Rishi Sunak, or I think even an indication that perhaps there was only one sip taken. I mean, is it the fact that Biden is still trying to work out the relationship, bearing in mind it was fraught when Boris Johnson was in number 10?
It certainly was, and I think that there is an element of that, although we must be careful about reading too much into this. This was the fourth time that President Biden has been in the United Kingdom during his presidency. That's quite a lot for one country to see those visits. He, of course, came to Carbis Bay in Cornwall for the G7. Yes. He came along also to the funeral of the Queen, and he came along to COP26 as well in Glasgow. And so there were many opportunities for Joe Biden to meet our succession of prime ministers in the last few years. But also, I think the way that we can think about this visit potentially is that the work was done yesterday. The tough bit of the visit, perhaps the least jolly bit of the visit for President Biden, was the Northern Ireland bit. And now he gets the sort of big ceremonial occasions, the family visits, perhaps the easier ride of things in the Republic.
Yeah, and a Gaelic football game as well. Well, we're just being told that he has now been taken to the drawing room, which indicates perhaps we're not going to have the band striking up. Clearly, I think because of the timing being delayed, maybe they're trying to push things forward. But this is a private meeting now, or discussion that he's having with the president inside the official residence. So let's just reflect, of course, on what we are expecting later. And I think there's a ringing of the peace bell that will be following. So let's bring in Darren McCaffrey, who is our political editor, who's also in Dublin, that's been following this presidential timetable, which has slipped a little, Darren, but they'll still be wanting to make the most of the weather, I guess, in Phoenix Park there.
Yeah, indeed, the weather much more different than it was last night, I can tell you, in County Louth, where the US President got slightly wet, along with the crowds that were waiting to see him as it rained there, as he went to meet some of his cousins, his fifth cousins, his ancestral home, wearing a baseball cap and taking selfies with the crowd, going into a pub with the Taoiseach, the Deputy Prime Minister, Micheál Martin. Very different today, as you say. The weather has come out. This is the more formal part of the visit in Aras and Neutrality with the Irish President, Michael D. Higgins. Now, they've met many times in the past. Clearly, Joe Biden very keen to demonstrate his close connection with Ireland. Interesting listening to your discussion there and listening to actually lots of other commentary when it comes to Joe Biden's visit. I think it is, when I say interesting, in the sense that kind of being very pro-Irish, which undoubtedly Joe Biden is, there's little doubt about that, that means somehow that equates to being anti-British, and I'm not entirely sure that is the case. I think that's the point that Joe Biden was trying to make yesterday, wasn't it, Mark, when he talked about his British heritage, when he talked about he was listening to Eunice. And on this idea about meeting Rishi Sunak, I can hear some clicks in the background. I assume he is with Michael D. Higgins. I think they're going to sign a book, essentially a welcoming book at Aras and Neutrality. Is that actually he's met Rishi Sunak more than probably any other world leader. They spent 45 minutes together yesterday. They spent an hour in San Diego just a couple of weeks ago. This is the third meeting he's had, because they met at the G7 as well when I was there in Bali. I can't name another world leader he spent quite as much time with. So I'm not entirely sure again why the press...
Apologies for interrupting. We are just, as you say, we've got the pictures now from inside with that official signing going on, and this, as we're reflecting, is a state visit. So even though President Biden, or Joe Biden as he was, has visited here 3 times, this is his first in the residence as president. So that event being marked here with a ledger, with him signing that as the President of the United States. having walked in on the red carpet by Michael D. Higgins and his wife, Sabine. And this, of course, a very proud day for the President of Ireland as well, given the links across the Atlantic. And you can hear the cameras clicking, as Darren was saying, recording this. It appears to be a little bit more than the signature. So maybe we've got a few thoughts being put down there on paper by Joe Biden. As Tom was indicating here, of course, he's a great fan of the poet Seamus Heaney, and we've got his widow actually being part of this party in the joint session of Parliament a little later. And I think he's just finishing signing with his signature as Michael D. Higgins looks on. Perhaps the President looking... How much more has he got to say? Tom, this is quite interesting.
It's the most verbose, lengthy visitor's book statement that I think I've ever seen someone write.
Well, maybe he's going through the poem again. Who knows, onto the page. But
quite possibly. But this is, of course, a big ceremonial moment. Of course, many world leaders have signed the visitor's book when visiting the Irish president. It's the done thing to do this first of all. And once Joe Biden has finally finished trying to spell his name or whatever he's doing at the moment, they'll be able to get on with the rest of the visit. It looked like Michael D. Higgins was tugging him a little bit.
Yeah, the presidential timetable has slipped so much, perhaps he had to sign a lot of other things on the way, and he's waxing lyrical.
I will be fascinated to see what he is actually writing. No doubt we will get a picture of this soon.
I don't think we're allowed to hear the private comments. That's part of the fact that this is a private discussion he'll have with the Irish president. But clearly this means a great deal to the US president. And the cameras really are clicking now in that moment where they're sharing these words.
Of course, this isn't the first time that Joe Biden has met Michael D. Higgins.
No, as we say, I think it's third visit to the residence.
Third visit to the residence, of course, as Vice President of the United States. In that role for 8 years, Joe Biden did visit a lot of countries around the world and visited Ireland on a number of occasions. The Vice President traditionally does a lot of those international visits on behalf of the President when the President's diary is too busy.
And the official photograph now. Thank you again, which...
The book was, as the Irish saying goes, your feet will bring you where your heart is. And then I say it's an honor to return, and I talk about returning again to the home of my ancestors, to celebrate the things that bind Ireland and the United States, and recommit ourselves to peace, equity, and I think the most Irish of words used in my family was dignity. And dignity. Anyway, thank you all very much. And I'm not going home. I'm staying here. Isn't this an incredible place? All you American reporters. Looks just like the White House, right? Thank you, Matt. Thank you.
So the handshakes and the explanation there as to what he was putting, and that word peace again, which is a pretty pointed message, Tom.
A very pointed message. And again, a lot of these themes that we have been discussing time and time again, returning to the homeland of his ancestors, even making the same joke that we were making about the house looking a lot like the White House, saying that he doesn't want to leave, telling American reporters that actually he'll be staying here. I'm not sure he'll be wanting to do that when he sees the next bout of rain. Of course, Dublin, like much of the British Isles, is notorious.
The band of low pressure.
Yeah.
Well, let's return to Darren. Darren, apologies for interrupting you and keeping you holding on for so long, but an explanation there from Joe Biden as why we had to wait for so long. That was a pretty heartfelt message from them there he was putting in the book.
Yeah, and I think we've talked about this quite a lot, haven't we, over the last couple of days, about kind of Irish Joe, if you like, and about this idea of returning home. That was certainly kind of the feeling you very strongly got last night in County Louth when he was meeting with his kind of ancestors, you know, people shouting welcome home, him saying he's back in Ireland, though he has joked in the past that he's not a proper Irishman because he doesn't drink. But in saying that, you know, this is a man who keenly feels his heritage, like lots of Americans do. You know, I think to you, maybe to Irish and British audiences, it's a little odd. But Americans do place an awful lot of emphasis on their heritage, and Joe Biden is very proudly Irish. As I say, I don't think that necessarily comes with the at the cost of necessarily the relationship with the UK. But Tom is entirely right in suggesting that this is the kind of more relaxing part of his visit. Yesterday was kind of quite politically difficult for Joe Biden, having to walk that tightrope as he did in Belfast, whereas he can kind of relax into this today. He knows Michael D. Higgins very well. He knows the Taoiseach, the Taoiseach, that's the Prime Minister and the Deputy Prime Minister, very well. And tomorrow will be a real highlight of his trip when he travels to the west coast of Ireland, to Mayo, again to actually meet ordinary members of the Irish public and also to address them in a speech tomorrow night. So this is kind of Joe Biden, in a sense, feeling like he's coming home. He's brought some of his relatives with him, as he always does, and he's someone who is very keen, not just on Irish poetry, but Irish culture, and clearly is enjoying this. People last night were saying that he looked really invigorated by this visit, and these images will play well, I would suspect, at home in the United States, where 30 to 40 million people identify as Irish Americans.
We're just getting a close-up now with our cameras of what's been written in that visitor's book, and clearly, as we were saying, this is heartfelt, and we understand there's going to be a tree planting now at the residence there in Phoenix Park, and the peace bell will be rung, as you say, Darren, a little bit more relaxed than what we saw yesterday. But we do have this address of the joint session of Parliament later, and I was just observing that it's interesting. We've got Sinn Féin's leader from Stormont, Michelle O'Neill, as well as the former president of Sinn Féin, Gerry Adams, in that particular audience. I mean, there are still political messages being delivered here.
Yeah, indeed, and we have to remember, you know, Sinn Féin is not just a major political force in Northern Ireland. It is here. It is the it was the largest party in terms of share of the vote at the last election, though a coalition of two of the other parties, Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, means that it is the main opposition party, though it is and has remained significantly ahead in the polls ever since. There is the prospect, potentially, in the next election, that Sinn Féin may well form the first ever government here in the Irish Republic. It is interesting, actually, when you talk about both houses of the Irish Parliament, the Senate, which is the second biggest chamber, the kind of lower chamber here in Ireland, that building, the room that it sits in, is actually the design for the Oval Office. It's provided the inspiration for the Oval Office. Again, a reminder of the historical links beyond Joe Biden to and between the United States and Ireland. But yes, only 4 US presidents have addressed a joint session of the Irish Parliament before, and this will be a chance to say for Joe Biden to speak to the Irish people, and that will not just include TDs, MPs if you like, but also senators as well, and it will involve representatives of Sinn Féin. It was notable though yesterday, I thought, in the speech in Belfast, he thanked a lot of people for the peace process, for the Good Friday Agreement. 2 parties he didn't name, again because of the political sensitivities, were the DUP and Sinn Féin.
Yeah, and of course he's sort of having to tread a very fine line between praising the efforts of those who brought about peace and not muddying the waters in terms of trying to find a way forward. And clearly, we're getting an indication from that in what Sir Geoffrey Donaldson had said in response to the various words. You know, it wasn't actually going to change the situation in Stormont anytime soon.
No, indeed, and I think in the end there was a recognition that given how brief the visit was, given the political instability in Northern Ireland and the sensitivities around the Windsor framework, that actually what the US president didn't need to do, what could make things worse, is this idea of interfering. The one recognition I think the DUP did give Joe Biden was that he said that any restoration of Stormont would be a judgment for Northern Irish politicians. But there was no doubt, was there, that Joe Biden was also saying if you get your act together, there will be not just kind of political support from the United States, but a hell of a lot of economic support as well. And it is fascinating, this actually, again, the closeness between the island of Ireland and the US, where, you know, Joe Biden's been an American first president. He's essentially provided an awful lot of protectionist measures for American business, tax breaks for American businesses to return to the United States. The one other country, though, they seem prepared to suggest that American companies should invest in is Ireland, and more particularly Northern Ireland. And so we'll have to see how this plays out. I suspect the political dynamic in Northern Ireland may well change in the months ahead after that local election next month. But at the moment, the focus of the next couple of days, clearly here in Dublin, will be on the kind of, you know, the Irishness inside Joe Biden, the most Irish presidents from JFK, but also that translation into hoping, as a man who wants to run for president potentially again next year, that this may well go on him a few couple of votes at the next election. Indeed,
I think we've got the official presentation of the Irish Defence Forces now outside the residence. The band is playing. We can't quite pick that up at the moment on our cameras, but clearly yes, here it comes. Here outside the official residence, the Irish Defence Forces are outside, lined in front of Joe Biden there. They're at attention. One thinks that perhaps the president will go and inspect that guard. And we are being told then a tree planting and the peace bell being rung. So here we are, the presentation of the colour. So the senior officer now presenting his guard of honour to the president. And the president moves forward off the red carpet. And the president marching in time with the band. So there we are. He's perhaps not been practicing, but certainly indicating that he's done this a few times before. Right on cue, he's back on the red carpet. Of course, the Irish Defence Forces and the band have been waiting some time to welcome the President with that guard of honour, but worth it there in the end. Well, as we look at these pictures, let's speak now to Gabia Gadevitz-Taita, a political reporter at the Irish Independent. Gabia, I hope I pronounced your name correctly there, but welcome to GB News as we look at these pictures. This is quite an occasion for both presidents. As we were reflecting, of course, Joe Biden's met Michael D. Higgins before, but not as a president.
Yeah, so this is really quite a significant visit, and I think Joe Biden, this is very much so a official state visit, but it's also a very personal one for him as well. I mean, we're seeing even, he did take some time yesterday, he went to Belfast, but he was very quick to, you know, hightail it back to Dublin and then into his motorcade to Louth. He went to see Carlingford Castle, which is the last Irish landmark that his great-great-grandfather would have seen before he left for New York. And then he spent that time in Dundalk afterwards meeting people lining the streets keen to meet him. And he keeps bringing up his visits to Ireland when he was a senator.
And it's interesting that visitors' book, the ledger inside the residence, quoting an Irish proverb, "Your feet will bring you where your heart is," adding it's an honour to return. But again, that word peace being written there, pledging to recommit to peace, equity and dignity. There are still these political messages being delivered.
Yeah, very much so. And right before he boarded the Air Force One on his way to Ireland, he told reporters, you know, I want to keep the peace, I'm going to keep the peace. And that's very much what he has done, I think, so far on this trip. He didn't stay in Belfast very long, and that has been subject to some criticism that, you know, he's here for the Good Friday 25th anniversary, but he spent a couple of hours in Belfast, and for those hours he was asleep. I just want to point to something else. I mean, the visit has been pretty much very positive, but there is a little bit of opposition politically, as there always is going to be to a US president visiting. People Before Profit, which have 5 TDs here in the Irish Parliament, they held a protest yesterday outside of the GPO in Dublin, protesting President Biden's visit. They're boycotting the joint address today. And also, I'm just seeing a polling copy come in from White House reporters who are very closely following the president. They're saying that as they got near Ars Nuchtron, there was one man holding a piece of paper that said, "Arrest Biden." You know, there is a little bit of opposition to his presence, but it's very little, and it has been he has been overwhelmingly warmly welcomed, I would say.
And what would be the reason for those protests? Because we do expect, of course, again, some indication that the US is prepared to invest literally with dollars in the Republic, as is the case, of course, in Northern Ireland, where he promised perhaps this additional investment if they moved the political process forward.
Yes, so People Before Profit would be a left-wing political grouping here in Ireland. They put out quite a harshly worded statement on Monday. They said, you know, President Biden is a warmonger. They disagree with his actions in Iraq. You know, of course, President Biden has very much hailed the Good Friday Agreement and said, look, it brought peace to this island, isn't it a great thing? But People Before Profit, who, you know, they're very, very left-wing, they have, you know, very much so, even though America has been against Russia's moves in Ukraine, they're saying, well, what about your actions in other parts of the world?
Yeah.
And they would also be of the opinion that in the bilaterals that President Michael D. Higgins, for example, who we're seeing now, you know, him and his wife Sabina Higgins, they've been very prominent anti-war campaigners. They would say in those bilateral meetings, you know, raise all those issues with him. I don't know if that's likely to happen. I mean, this is very much so a positive photo opportunity, very much so for President Biden and his officials and the Irish Taoiseach and delegates. So, look, I don't think it's. Look, we don't know what might be discussed. Perhaps such things will be raised. We've yet to see, I suppose. But I don't think the joint address to the Iraqis later on this afternoon, it's not going to be. It's going to be very much keeping the peace again. He's going to talk about the strong political ties between the US and Ireland.
Yeah, and have any eyebrows been raised at the fact that we've got Sinn Féin's leader from Stormont, Michelle O'Neill, in the audience for that address, and indeed Sinn Féin's former president, Gerry Adams.
Yeah, that's quite an interesting one. I mean, we are going to see also, as you mentioned, their former Taoiseach, Enda Kenny and Bertie Ahern, they're also going to return to Leinster House. That is customary that all former Taoiseach are invited to such a monumental joint address. That would happen with most visits. I think it's going to be interesting to see how well Gerry Adams and Michelle O'Neill are received. But look, I think in the spirit of the Good Friday Agreement, there is a recognition there that that agreement was made possible because all parties sat around the table, and perhaps that's a reflection of that also.
Now, of course, we had President Biden joking, I'm not going home, I'm staying here, indicating that the residence was very much like the White House. But he is due to head to west of Ireland tomorrow. And, of course, we reflect he's got a certain Joe Kennedy in his White House party as well. So yet more symbolism to come tomorrow.
Yes, so Joe Kennedy was appointed special envoy, and he's accompanying President Biden on this trip. Again, like President Biden does have a day full of commitments today in Dublin, of very serious. He's meeting the president, he's having a bilateral with the Taoiseach, then he's going to addressing the joint Oireachtas, really quite serious political diary events. But then he's going back to that personal side of the trip, heading off to Mayo. He's going to visit the Knock Shrine, which is, it's quite a very much so a religious significance. It's believed that there was an apparition there many years ago by the Virgin Mary and other saints. So, he's very much so connecting with his Catholic roots there. But it's also, I think, it's something that an American would do in a visit to Ireland. They would try and visit, for example, the Knock Shrine. That's a very popular tourist hotspot. And he's very much so like a tourist in that sense.
And how is the tourist visit going down with the Irish public? I mean, how is this being played on the news channels and television and so on?
Look, it's dominating Europe coverage, and it's the same for RTE, which is the state broadcaster. It's dominating coverage. Virgin Media, also the other main broadcaster. If you're tuning into the radio, it's all that you can hear. The front pages today are splattered with photographs, with headlines. It is the big political story of the week. Like, there is no doubt about that. And for a US president to come to a country as small as Ireland, 5 million population, and to spend 3 days here visiting really everything and anything that he can, as much as he could squeeze into that short couple of day visit, like that does not go unnoticed. It is quite significant that even though Ireland is a small country, the role that it has on the global stage, like, it's really not to be underestimated. And that same role, whenever you have St. Patrick's Day, of course, we see the Taoiseach head over to the White House. That's a full day that the Taoiseach spends, with officials.
Yeah.
It really gives a really grand platform for the country on an international stage.
And the sun is shining too, which can't be bad, of course, given all this, the weather we saw yesterday. Gabia, thank you very much indeed for your thoughts. Political reporter there at the Irish Independent. And, of course, we'll head back to Dublin and Phoenix Park for, I think, the tree planting is obviously the next on the itinerary. And, of course, that visit to the joint session of Parliament a little later. But let's update you now on some other news. And in terms of the economy, the latest figures suggesting that growth in the UK economy flat for February, according to the Office for National Statistics, but manufacturing output down 0.2%. Now, that, of course, central to the government's aim of levelling up, particularly for the Midlands and the north of England. So, Chancellor Jeremy Hunt's recent budget, has it helped or hindered efforts to so-called level up the UK? Our economics and business editor Liam Halligan has this special report from the West Midlands, Britain's manufacturing hub.
Builders are busy in Birmingham, the UK's second biggest city. But is the government's flagship levelling up policy, spreading wealth from the southeast to the Midlands and north, now a reality?
This is Victoria Square in central Birmingham, one of several public spaces in the city that's been getting a much-needed facelift. But to what extent does levelling up extend beyond city centres to towns across Britain's regions?
Material prices have increased significantly.
In Walsall, 10 miles from central Birmingham, PP Control and Automation manufactures internal control systems which operate complex machinery. With 230 workers, PP is expanding fast. But CEO Tony Haig says the recent rise in corporation tax and still sky-high energy bills will hurt companies across the Midlands.
I think levelling up is a complete and utter joke and has been a political slogan for some time. I don't see any evidence whatsoever of any genuine activity around levelling up.
In his budget 3 weeks ago, Jeremy Hunt announced low-tax investment zones, including parts of Birmingham. But the leader of the city's Labour-run council says levelling up isn't happening.
The Office of Budget Responsibility are forecasting a downgrading of the UK growth over the coming 12 months as a result of the Conservative budget. So I think it was very, very disappointing. We're also faced with the cost of living crisis right across the city. And again, the OBR are saying that living standards are going to have their hardest hit since the 1950s. So I don't think the budget offered very much.
Birmingham has a Labour council, but the West Midlands as a whole has a Tory mayor. Andy Street says the new investment zones will encourage growth, making levelling up a reality.
We're standing in what you would probably say is Britain's best and biggest, most successful enterprise zone here in the city centre. That has definitely bolstered growth. We've seen behind you HSBC coming in, Goldman Sachs coming in there. They probably wouldn't have done to this location if it hadn't been for that status. So we've learned from that. We've proposed to government those new measures. They've agreed. That will definitely bolster growth.
So what do ordinary Brummies say? Is levelling up just a slogan?
I think it's always going to be London, and always has been, really. I can't really see that happening. I think that's always going to be the case. It's where the money is.
Yeah, it's written, but there are some areas that they are not really working on.
Probably a gimmick, like most things are, so. But that's as much as I know about it.
As the economy struggles to recover and manufacturers fight on, the success or otherwise of levelling up could decide the next general election. Yet even in Birmingham city centre, this flagship policy is, at best, a work in progress. Liam Halligan, GB News, in Birmingham.
Well, let's get the latest now. Liam's joining us here in the studio with On the Money. So, no recession, but flatlining. And, of course, all these manufacturing companies are, as you reported here, looking at the energy prices about to go up. Still problems with getting staffing and employment and so on. And yet we've got Jeremy Hunt saying, things are looking up. Where are we?
We're on a knife edge. That's where we are. We're certainly not in recession.
Yeah.
So the economy has outperformed what the OBR said would happen, the Office of Budget Responsibility, what the Bank of England said would happen, what the IMF said would happen. The economy has been very, very resilient, though I do understand that when the ONS, Office of National Statistics, brought its growth figure out for February this morning, 0% is not a particularly inspiring number. Here's a little bit of a breakdown of the figures, Mark. In February, GDP did flatline. It was 0%, as we can see there on the graphic. And to break that down a bit more, the services sector, which is the sort of real engine room of the economy, that fell 0.1%, largely because you had lots of strikes going on, and teacher strikes and other parts of the economy. Construction did pretty well because there was quite a lot of decent weather in the early part of this year, up 2.4%. That sector, it's a lot easier for now for them to get materials than it was when supply chains were more snarled up. So those materials are expensive.
Yeah.
And production there, that's a broad subsector. That includes manufacturing. That's what you referred to there just before my report. That fell 0.2%. And that's before, Mark, and this is what I've been trying to stress in these reports I've been doing from the Midlands, the manufacturing heartland of the economy. That's before this rise in corporation tax kicked in April, of course, from 19 to 25%. And it's before the government took away a lot of the assistance that a lot of these manufacturers have had with their energy bills. And that is a big problem. So manufacturing's struggling, and my concern is that it may continue to struggle. And if that's the case, that not only won't fail to really kickstart the economy, but it also means levelling up, which is a flagship policy that will really determine in the next election, is less likely to happen and help the Conservatives.
And, of course, the other thing in terms of sort of trying to work out the politics is where we are with consumer confidence and how people feel. I mean, it's interesting, the ONS was also saying that, quite a few retail shops had what they said was a buoyant month. So there is a bit of pent-up demand, maybe, that people are still prepared to go out and spend what they've got, of course.
Yeah, we were reporting earlier this week, the British Retail Consortium said retail sales were up 5.1%, though that is by value, of course, and if inflation
is at 10%, which still is, then, of course, retail sales are falling in real terms. But, 5.1%, it's better than a lower number. So I think there is some pent-up consumer demand as the weather gets better. There is a sense that there's recovery in the air.
Yeah.
But my point is that manufacturing is vital. It's still 10, 12, 15% of the British economy. A lot of the service sector feeds off the manufacturing sector. Manufacturing drives our exports. It drives our research and development spending. And manufacturing, from these numbers out today, the headline is the economy's flatlining, but manufacturing, it's not doing as badly as it was in December and January, but it's by no means out of the woods yet.
Yeah, and clearly they're having to borrow, a lot of firms, to keep going and to tie themselves over and to pay these energy costs. Where are we on what's going to happen on interest rates and, as you mentioned, inflation? I mean, we keep waiting to see if it's topped out and things are going to get better.
Well, yesterday, news came that the US inflation rate is now down at 5%, which is the lowest since early 2021. That's down from a peak of 9.1% back in June. So that's the Americans have already almost halved their inflation rate. They've been very aggressive with their interest rate rises. Their currency's been very strong, which means their imports don't rise in costs so much. But what I would say is our inflation number is coming out on Wednesday.
Yep.
But this month, there is not an MPC decision. There is not a decision by the Monetary Policy Committee.
Okay.
We have to wait until May for that decision. They only have 8 meetings a year, so it's not quite monthly.
But the Bank of England Governor, Andrew Bailey, has been talking. Now, you mentioned the interest rates being raised in the States. Of course, that indirectly hit a lot of the banks because basically the bonds they had were worth less as a
Exactly
result.
right.
And Andrew Bailey has taken time again to say, well, we're putting measures in place, we're making sure things, because there's still a worry that we could get some kind of, not a collapse, but certainly a run on banks.
Well, I wouldn't say a run on banks. I'd say there's a worry that financial markets could lurch, correct, if you like, both stocks and bonds, and that would lead to a sort of the scenario we had after the mini-budget with market interest rates going up and undermining people's abilities to get mortgages and so on. There is still a little bit of that about. And that's one reason why the Bank of England, when it just makes its next rate decision in May, will be reluctant to raise rates anymore. We've had 11 interest rate rises in a row, Mark. They take time to feed through. We've gone from 0.25% to 4.25% in consecutive rises. And those interest rate rises, as you say, they do weigh heavily on financial markets. And even though you may think that financial markets are overvalued, they won't want that overvaluation to lurch downwards in a way that undermines confidence. And, of course, lots of people with home loans and personal loans won't want interest rates to rise anymore.
No.
We might have one more interest rate rise in the tank. That's my instinct.
Right, and basically just to be seen to doing the job, the remit they've got to keep it down to 2%.
The Deputy Governor of the Bank of England, Hugh Pill, last week gave a speech, little noticed, but people like me follow these things. He said, we may need to do an extra rate rise to, quote, see the job through in order to finally get on top of inflation. Look, inflation on the latest number is still in double digits. It's still 10.4%.
And we thought it may have dipped below that 10%.
That's right. I do think it will go down into single digits when we get that number next Wednesday. But that will be very, very closely watched. It's going to be big news next Wednesday. A lot of people in this country and around the world, not just ordinary households, but in financial markets too. It's going to be all eyes on that inflation number next Wednesday.
And we'll have the latest analysis here, of course,
Absolutely.
on that, and explain to you at home, of course, what's going or not going on.
Not going on.
Liam, thank you very much indeed. Now, let's actually talk about other financial matters in terms of houses, or second homes, we should say, because under new plans to reduce housing pressures at tourist hotspots, second homeowners now being forced to seek planning permission to even start renting out the properties as holiday lets. Well, the Housing Secretary, Michael Gove, announcing today plans to alter the law to give councils the power to ban any future holiday lets if their local area does not have enough affordable housing to rent or buy. Well, it comes after a surge in holiday home ownership since 2019 in particular, with hotspots such as Devon and Cornwall all being blamed for pricing out locals and leaving homes empty for much of the year. Well, let's now speak to property expert Julie Ford, who is joining us. And Julie, clearly the government now believes that the market's been skewed too much.
Yeah, hi, Mark. Thanks for having me on. What we have to really understand about the consultation age as well. So for second owners and people that do have their properties out as accommodation for guests and holiday lets, this is only an idea of what's going to happen. So I don't think there's a reason to panic too much just yet.
Right. So would the government be able to impose this, or would it be up to each individual authority, you know, a county council, whatever, to decide the policy for their particular area?
It will depend on the consultation. So it could be that this will come in as set legislation. It will be primary legislation. But the consultation does talk about secondary legislation. And that usually means that local councils can then adopt it as an opt-in or an opt-out, depending on how their particular area is affected directly by second homes or places being let out as holiday lets.
Yeah. And what is the direct effect? Is it the fact that it's been pushing prices up, or does it just make less accommodation and flats and houses available for local people, in particularly these seaside resorts?
I think, in all honesty, it's a culmination of so many different effects. You've got the effect of tourism on a local area. Obviously, that's great. It brings in economy for that area, but then it also drives up the pressure on local services, such as fire, ambulance. The more people there, the more pressure you need there. But also, yes, it's pushing house prices up, because if somewhere is going to bring in great economy, you want to have your second home there because you then want to be part of that economy. You want to benefit from that. But then, obviously, you've got the fact that if everyone's buying up these second homes to be holiday lets or something like that, then you don't have the affordable housing for people in the local area to stay in the local area if they want to. So it's a real culmination of things that I think has got us to this point of needing to set in some kind of scheme or legislation into minimising how second homes are actually used and rented out.
And is it because it's not just families buying a second home to have a holiday? It is commercial concerns of buying up lots of these properties to get into, you know, the sort of Airbnb sector, as it's called.
Yeah, absolutely. So at the moment in the private rented sector, there are so many constraints for landlords. We currently have 169 laws and 402 regulations governing that sector alone, along with the hits that they have for tax, Section 24, which came in for the Finance Act. Landlords are finding that, in all honesty, if they've only got one or two properties, being a landlord, it isn't a commercial venture anymore. It's actually costing them money. So they're looking for a more viable business option. And a lot of the time it's a business decision, as opposed to not just wanting to rent to tenants. It actually makes them more money renting their second homes out or their properties out as holiday lets.
Yeah, and I guess that's the situation not just in the holiday sector, but it's going for all properties, that, you know, rents are going up through the roof, and people are having to try and get on the property ladder because they just can't afford to rent anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. But again, there's the stumbling block, because although there are a lot of bonuses and support systems out there for first-time buyers, being able to actually get the deposit you need. I mean, most first-time buyers now, the average age is 48, and the average deposit you need is between £40,000 to £60,000. Now, if you're renting at the higher end of the market, and I heard Paul Champlina on yesterday saying that the average London rent was just £2,500. If you're paying that out, how on earth do you get your foot on the ladder as a first-time buyer?
Yeah, just £2,500 indeed. Julie, thank you very much indeed for joining us. And, of course, we'll see what comes of that policy that Michael Gove has indicated they want to introduce. Thank you very much indeed. Coming up here on GB News, we'll be back live to Dublin and following the President on his visit with an address to both chambers of the Irish Parliament. All that coming up live for you shortly. Stay with us.
Hello there, welcome to your Thursday weather update from the Met Office. I'm Claire Nazir. Still showery out there, some sunshine coming through. We've lost the sting in the wind, which is good news, but still fresh. Low pressure sinking down towards the Low Countries. You can see this area of cloud and rain waiting in the wings. That will bring some wet weather across to more southern parts on Friday. Before that, though, low pressure firmly in charge, and that means more showers. Some dry weather across central parts of England and Wales, but further north, always a swathe of clouds, showery bursts of rain, which could turn heavy. Later then, we'll see more cloud just encroaching across the southwest. But before that, some dry weather to end the day, as temperatures climb to around 10 to 14 degrees Celsius, so slightly higher than yesterday. Now, through Thursday evening and overnight, that shower rain continues across the north as well as the east. You can see some clearer skies where we could see a touch of frost before thickening cloud brings some outbreaks of rain towards the West Country through the early hours of the morning. It is going to be a cold night away from the southwest where it will be wet, but showers will continue across the far north of Scotland. And here we'll see temperatures holding around 4 degrees Celsius, picking up again as we head into tomorrow morning once the sun gets to work. First thing then on Friday morning, this rain skirts central southern parts of England and Wales, lingering towards the east. Showers develop inland. They will develop readily tomorrow. They're likely to be heavy with the risk of thunder. You can see some intense bursts, particularly across the eastern side of the country. Brighter weather to end the day, this time across the western side of Scotland as well as Northern Ireland. And temperatures here 12 or 13 degrees Celsius. Here's your outlook through Saturday. Some showery bursts yet again towards the east. Drier skies elsewhere after a bit of a frosty start, but at least though you'll see some sunshine and a light wind. Temperatures though through the next few days are slowly rising. It is going to feel warmer. There will be some sunshine in the mix, but always more clouds and a little rain towards the north as well as the west. Bye-bye.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Hello, I'm Calvin Robinson. Do not miss my Common Sense Crusade, Saturdays at 7 p.m. Join me for some in-depth discussions on faith. Is that not the start of the slippery slope?
It's very much so.
And the big moral questions of the day. I'm baffled.
You've got some nerve.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's 1 o'clock. A very good afternoon. You're with GB News Live with me, Mark Longhurst, and coming up for you this Thursday lunchtime. I don't want to go home. President Biden meets his Irish counterpart with pomp and circumstance at the official residence in Dublin. Next up, he'll be addressing both houses of Parliament in Dublin. Also in the audience, Sinn Féin's leader from Stormont, Michelle O'Neill, and the party's former president, Gerry Adams, still some political controversy. A GB News exclusive, while the Labour Party activists are considering withdrawing from Pride marches this year because of the party leadership's so-called flip-flopping on transgender issues. And some breaking news, 8 serving and former Met police officers have been found guilty of gross misconduct concerning offensive messages, some concerning Katie Price's disabled son. We'll have the latest for you. First, though, all the headlines with Bethany.
Mark, thank you. Good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 1. I'm Bethany Elsey with your top stories from the GB newsroom. US President Joe Biden is meeting with Ireland's President Michael D. Higgins at his official residence in Dublin. An armed guard was set up around the building in Phoenix Park to welcome the US President. The pair will take part in a tree planting ceremony shortly and also a ringing of the peace bell. President Biden is also due to address the Irish Parliament later and meet with Taoiseach Leo Varadkar. It's the second day of a 3-day visit to the Republic of Ireland. And when signing in the Irish President's visitors book, Joe Biden said he isn't going home.
It's an honour to return, and I talk about returning again to the home of my ancestors, to celebrate the things that bind Ireland and the United States and recommit ourselves to peace, equity, and I think the most Irish of words used in my family was dignity. And dignity. So, anyway, thank you all very much. And I'm not going home. I'm staying here. Isn't this an incredible place?
The Chancellor says the outlook for the UK economy is brighter than expected, despite new figures showing there was no growth in February. Data from the Office for National Statistics shows a 0.4% decrease in gross domestic product from January. The service sector fell, with the ONS blaming strike action by teachers and civil servants. A fall in gas and electric usage due to the milder weather was also responsible, but the figures do show GDP grew 0.1% in the 3 months to February. Jeremy Hunt says the UK is set to avoid a recession. As you've been hearing news in the last hour, 8 serving and former Met police officers have been found guilty of gross misconduct over discriminatory and offensive messages that they sent. The officers, 7 men and 1 woman, were found to have sent sexist, racist, homophobic, transphobic and disableist comments in a WhatsApp group chat. During the 5th day of the hearing, the legal chair described the breach of standards as so serious it justifies dismissal. A 74-year-old man has been extradited from Pakistan and charged with the murder of a female police officer over 17 years ago. 38-year-old pacey Sharon Bishnivsky was shot in 2005 while responding to a robbery in Bradford. Pirandita Khan appeared in court for a brief hearing today before being remanded back into custody. He'll appear at the Old Bailey on Monday. A government minister is calling on junior doctors to suspend what he calls extremely damaging strike action while talks take place. Thousands of medics with the BMA in England are walking out for the 3rd of 4 days of industrial action this week. The conciliation service, ACAS, has said it's ready to help broker talks to resolve the pay dispute. Policing Minister Chris Philp says the government is prepared to negotiate, but pay demands must be reasonable. Downing Street had previously refused to talk unless the request for a 35% pay rise was dropped. The body of a woman has been found washed up on a beach after a search operation off Brighton Palace Pier. Coast Guard helicopters and RNLI knife boats were involved in the rescue effort, which was launched on Wednesday afternoon after a report of a person in the sea. The heavy winds of Storm Noah had made search efforts challenging. Sussex police say an investigation is underway. Demonstrations have continued in France on the 12th day of nationwide strikes. Hundreds of railway workers gathered at Paris Gare de Lyon station to protest against President Emmanuel Macron's plans to increase the pension age to 2 years to 64. Opinion polls show a wide majority of voters still oppose the reforms. Tomorrow, the Constitutional Council will decide whether or not the law can be applied in France. Donald Trump is suing his former lawyer, Michael Cohen, for £400 million. The former US president is seeking damages after Cohen testified before the Manhattan grand jury that indicted him. Trump has accused Cohen of failing to honour attorney-client confidentiality and of profiting by spreading falsehoods about him. Cohen's lawyer called the lawsuit frivolous. And the Royal Mint is set to release a new range of commemorative coins featuring a crowned portrait of the King for the very first time. The collection depicts King Charles III wearing the Tudor crown, which he personally chose for the portrait. A 50p and a £5 coin will be released later this month, ahead of the coronation in May. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens now. It's back to Mark.
Bethany, thank you very much indeed. Let's bring you some sad news, some breaking news coming through that the fashion designer Dame Mary Quant has died at the age of 93. Her family saying that she had died peacefully at home in Surrey this morning. Of course, Dame Mary was one of the most recognised figures of the swinging 60s, a fashion designer who championed the miniskirt and, along with Vidal Sassoon, championed the bob haircut, white lipstick and all those fashion statements that made London and Britain the centre of the cultural world in the 1960s. An outstanding innovator, her family called her. Of course, we'll have more tributes being paid to a giant of the fashion world a little later. But let's update you now on what's been happening in Dublin with US President Joe Biden meeting the Irish President Michael D. Higgins. He signed the visitors' book in the historic state reception room at Aras an Ochtarain and asked what he'd written in that book. The President said he quoted an Irish proverb, "Your feet will bring you where your heart is." He's also added that it was an honour to return.
It's an honour to return, and I talk about returning again to the home of my ancestors, to celebrate the things that bind Ireland and the United States and recommit ourselves to peace, equity, and I think the most Irish of words used in my family was dignity and dignity. So, anyway, thank you all very much. And I'm not going home. I'm staying here. Isn't this an incredible place?
Well, he took the words right out of my mouth. And at the moment, he's having a private meeting with the President, and then there will be a tree planting ceremony outside the official residence there in Phoenix Park, and then the ringing of the peace bell. Well, a military band would play the American national anthem and then the Irish anthem for the President outside the official residence, following President Biden then inspecting the official guard of honour. All part, of course, of this state visit as it is. Let's bring in our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, who's been following events. And certainly they literally rolled out the red carpet there, Darren.
Yeah, they really have indeed, and it must be said the sunshine this afternoon, Mark. It's a pretty glorious, if a little windy day here in Dublin, but the President's currently meeting his Irish counterpart, the Irish President Michael D. Higgins, as you say, at the Irish President's official residence here in Dublin in the Phoenix Park, Aras an Ochtarain. Actually, it shares the park with the US Embassy, the ambassador's residence, which is also the only other building inside the Phoenix Park. Again, a sign of the close connection between Ireland and the United States. Quite extraordinary when one steps back, I suppose, to think Ireland's not a big place. It's a country of around 5 million people, and yet there's almost an expectation that whoever is in the White House will at least visit this country once in their term of office. It's certainly true of Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, Barack Obama, Ronald Reagan, not of Donald Trump, but of Joe Biden. And maybe not surprising with Joe Biden. As you heard just then, he views himself very much as an Irish-American president, probably the most Irish-American president America's had since JFK. Today's events, though, as you say, he is talking with Michael D. Higgins now. He's then going to go out into the garden of Aras an Ochtarain and plant a tree alongside trees that have been planted from everyone from Queen Elizabeth II when she came here on a state visit just over 10 years ago to one that was planted by John F. Kennedy back in the 1960s. And Aras an Ochtarain has been the official residence of the Irish president since the inception of the state 100 years ago. And then later on today, he'll travel back into the centre of Dublin, where he'll have talks with the Taoiseach, with the Irish Prime Minister Leo Varadkar, and then he'll address both houses of the Irish Parliament, the Oireachtas, a little later on this afternoon. I suppose it'll be a pretty upbeat speech where again he'll emphasise the connection between Ireland and the United States, but also talk about peace. And then tonight, Mark, a big slap-up dinner at Dublin Castle for the dignitaries of Ireland. I think it's fair to say that, as you could see in those remarks as he made just before he went into that meeting with the Irish president, he feels very much at home here, very comfortable here, and it does feel a lot more informal than some of the events we saw in Belfast yesterday.
But we do have then this the formal address of the two houses of the Parliament, the Republic's Parliament, and an indication perhaps of what we might hear in what he wrote in this visitor's book, pledging to recommit to peace, equity and dignity. We were reflecting that amongst the audience for that speech will be Sinn Féin's leader from Stormont, Michelle O'Neill, as well as Sinn Féin's former president, Gerry Adams. And clearly a lot of the reporters are trying to draw the political messages being delivered here.
Well, I think in many ways, though, it is just simply a reflection of reality. I mean, Sinn Féin are the main opposition here in Ireland, in the Irish Republic. They finished first, actually, at the last general election in terms of percentage share of the vote. Now, there is a coalition government in place, which means that Sinn Féin's not in government, but they remain ahead in the polls here in Ireland. It is entirely possible that when the next election happens, they could form a government for the first time. Clearly, they are the largest party now in Northern Ireland as well. So I think the very fact that someone like Michelle O'Neill and the former Irish President Gerry Adams, along with Mary Lou McDonald, who's the current Sinn Féin leader, will be there in the audience is maybe not a surprise. But Joe Biden knows these figures very well, Mark. He's met them many times. He's met Michael D. Higgins numerous times, both here in Ireland and in the United States. He came here quite a lot as vice president and before that as a US senator. So as I say, he's got a close relationship with almost all the politicians he'll be meeting over the 48 hours or so that he is in the Republic of Ireland.
Well, the tree planting is just taking place as we speak to you, Darren, and the president back with his sunglasses on in the sunshine, as you say. One wonders what had been happening if that storm had still been blowing through Dublin in terms of being out there in the garden. But this, as you say, is perhaps a little bit more relaxed than we have seen previously. But just to touch on what you were talking about, Sinn Féin, I think Mary Lou McDonald has basically been saying there's no ambiguity, she said, about Sinn Féin's stance on US foreign policy, because one of the TDs, I think, accused Joe Biden of using the Doyle chamber as a soapbox for a foreign policy agenda. So there's still a little bit of sort of controversy behind the scenes, in particular about the US role in Iraq and Afghanistan. But we've now got the peace spell. So that ringing out there over Phoenix Park, and I think now the official photographs as well, and another pull. There we are, one for the cameras and the photographers, or two for them, and another handshake. And one reflects, Darren, that he's got a smile on his face here on all these occasions. He's clearly relishing this particular visit, and I guess how it's going to play back home in Washington. Let's not forget that.
Yeah, just first of all to pick up on your point about the address to the Oireachtas, the Irish Parliament later on today. Let's not forget that Ireland is a neutral nation. It's not a member of NATO. It doesn't like to get involved in foreign conflicts. And you're right, that is where there is a dividing line between American and Irish politics. Now, actually, interestingly, Ireland is starting to have a debate here about whether it needs to drop its neutrality. And again, it comes back to this point I've been trying to emphasise today. The kind of Joe Biden's kind of pro-Irish stand isn't necessarily at the expense
of... thing. I know many of you have the same experience with your ancestry wherever the country of origin was. But you hear all these stories about, you know, what it was like back in Ireland. They heard from their parents and grandparents and great-grandparents. And the thing, my first trip over here, when I went to the Boyne, and I looked down and my grandfather Finnegan used to say, his grandfather, Owen Finnegan, used to say, Scranton, Pennsylvania is just like the Boyne Valley. And I thought, well, you stand there and you look, And Scranton, there's a river runs through called the Lackawanna River, and a mountain on either side in the valley where we live. You could look down and see, you could see how 100 years earlier it would look like the building. And there's all those things anyway. It's just so great to always have an excuse to come back.
Mr. President, could you give an update on that leak investigation, the leaked documents from DOD?
I can't right now. There's a full-blown investigation going on, as you know, with the intelligence community and the Justice Department, and they're getting close. I don't have an answer.
How concerned are you about this leak?
Are you concerned about our
Are you concerned about the leak?
Okay, guys, it's time to go. Let's go. Cool, we got to move.
I'm not concerned about the leakages, and I'm concerned that it happened. But there's nothing contemporaneous that I'm aware of that is of great consequence.
Are you concerned about our relationship with allies? Everyone, let's move. Cool. Let's move.
Mark the 10th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement, so that's the peace bell. 25 years on from the Good Friday Agreement, what are your hopes for the next 25 years for the people of Ireland, both jurisdictions?
It gets even closer. I hope that the government begins to function as it used to, in terms of functioning as a representative body in the North. I think that's necessary, and but that's for you all to decide, not for me to decide. But I think that I'm very proud of my colleague George Mitchell. I think he did a fine job. He said 300 days of failure and 1 day of success. And we got to build on that one day continuing. Thank you.
Mr. President, can I have a selfie?
Mr. President, are British secrets safe in America?
So we've got the questions there from the White House press pack. To start with, concerned about the... Oh, he's coming back. I think more questions. Let's listen in.
Who's going to take the selfie from the Higgins?
Well, it was a handshake and a selfie, I think.
Mr. President, why do Irish shoemakers make...
Well, that's a first, a selfie with the press pack, indicating how perhaps informal some of this is, but the President being asked there about those security leaks with the various confidential documents, saying he wasn't that concerned because they're not contemporaneous. Then, of course, he was asked about the whole issue of the Good Friday Agreement, once more indicating the importance of George Mitchell, Senator George Mitchell, and his work. But in terms of the way forward, saying that's for you all to decide, not me. And Michael D. Higgins agreeing with the tribute being paid there to George Mitchell as they go back now towards the front of the residence, having planted that tree and rung that peace bell. Let's bring Darren back in. Darren, that was quite interesting. I mean, clearly the White House press pack wanted to talk about these issues of the secrets being revealed, but also, you know, what happens now for the next 25 years?
Yeah, just a few things. First of all, there's been quite a lot of frustration, I think, amongst the US press pack, and there is a group of reporters who follow the president around wherever he goes in the United States or indeed around the world. The White House pool, it's called, a bit like we have here in the UK with the lobby system. And there's been frustration that President Biden is here for 4 days and is not doing one press conference. In fact, he's been criticised by the former US President Donald Trump on that point. So maybe that was an effort today to answer some of those questions. First of all, on this leak, this comes, of course, around the leak of intel on Ukraine that has emerged rather randomly, it must be said, on a chat room from the Pentagon, revealing, for example, that Ukraine may not have enough air defences to last it through to the end of April, as well as details about where the US is getting its source information from inside Moscow. Now, clearly it's quite concerning. The Times today reporting how it could be putting British lives at risk. President Biden slightly dampening down there the suggestion that this could be quite dangerous, but insisting there is a full investigation into it. And on the Good Friday Agreement, much of what we heard yesterday, interestingly, he referred to Northern Ireland as the North, which many nationalists down here do so, but he talked about the restoration of Stormont being up to politicians in Northern Ireland. And again, I think it's that pivot that we've seen in the last 24 hours or so, with a sensitivity that he does not want to interfere in the internal politics of Northern Ireland, if you like. So President Biden answering some of the questions there outside Aris and Lutheran. And as I say, he'll now travel, having left that residence, back into the centre of Dublin, where again the talks will continue with the Irish Prime Minister, the Taoiseach, Leo Varadkar.
Yeah, I think we're seeing the official residential dog now, not the White House dog, but the Aris and Lutheran dog there being given some attention by Michael D. Higgins, and perhaps he's going to try and get him back inside. Yeah, we wondered whether Joe Biden was going to help him with that process, but no, I think Michael D. Higgins has got hold of the collar, got him back in the front door, which will be shut firmly behind him, or left open. There we are. So a little bit of Irish informality there going on.
Yeah, I have to say, I think the Bernese Mountain Dogs, they are quite famous in Ireland. Michael D. Higgins is by no estimation a very tall man at certain stages. It almost seems like his dogs are taller than he is. We have to remember, though, he's also a politician who's in his 80s. And actually, Joe Biden and Michael D. Higgins have got an awful lot in common. They've been in public life and public service for a very long time, respective in the countries. They both got elected to the highest office to become kind of presidents of the respective countries quite late in age. Michael D. Higgins, there were many suggestions when he ran for his second term, was too old to do so, though he did, unopposed effectively, and won that election. And those same questions now, of course, being asked of President Biden ahead of the next election next year.
Indeed, the parallels, as you say, and interesting what you were talking there about the White House press pack and maybe a bit of frustration, because, of course, he's still not declared officially that he will run for this second term, but indicated at the White House at the Easter egg roll, as they called it, that he was considering that. And clearly, there is the indication from his presidential party that, you know, this will be playing very well, as we're discussing back at home, on the international stage, part of a peace process, and, of course, his family and cultural roots as well.
Yeah, really fascinating this. As you say, we've got quite a lot of ankle over the weekend from the White House with suggestions that effectively President Biden had made his mind up that he was going to run next year, that he was going to seek the Democrats' nomination process to become the next US president. Now, even if he does announce that, and apparently he's not ready or is not willing to announce it yet, he could still be challenged for the Democratic nomination. It's not automatic that if you're the current incumbent that you get that, and he could well face challenges. The talk about a relative of John F. Kennedy's, in fact, trying to challenge him for that, though you'd have to suspect where he is at the moment means that he's almost certainly likely to secure it. But you're right, are these images going to play well at home? Well, I don't think they're going to do him any harm, let's put it like that, Mark.
Yeah.
You know, there are 30 to 40 million Americans who see themselves as having some form of Irish heritage. Clearly he feels very at home here. Clearly he's getting a very warm welcome from the Irish president. We'll see similar scenes later on today from the Irish Parliament, and indeed from the people of Ireland tomorrow, probably in Mayo. So yes, this will play well at home. I'd say I'm not entirely sure it's going to be a massive vote winner, but it'll certainly not do him any harm, I would have thought.
And I guess that would be the case until there's any gaffe. And that clearly is a concern, I guess, for the White House press pack and his detail, because, of course, he had this comment about the black and tans, confusing that with the All Blacks, the rugby team, and they've been trying to sort of sit on that a little bit, I gather.
Yeah, not ideal last night from Joe Biden's point of view by any estimation. He was talking in a pub about rugby, and Ireland have clearly been quite successful in rugby in recent months and years, securing the Six Nations, but also beating New Zealand in the last year or so. They, of course, are called the All Blacks, but yes, without a shadow of a doubt, slip of the tongue, massive gaffe. He talked about calling the black and tans. They are a really controversial section of the British military that were based here in Ireland during the War of Independence, viewed as carrying out quite a few atrocities against Irish people here. And that is not a good look, given the sensitivities around history on this island. Now, the White House, as you say, have trying to suggest that actually people in the room understood what he meant, but there is no doubt for anyone watching that footage that he did make a mistake. And this is a president who's prone to verbal slip-ups, if you like. He does them on a very, very regular basis. Now, his kind supporters suggest, you know, he's the President of the United States, he's got a lot on his mind, he's got long days, and everyone makes mistakes from time to time. If one was to film us most of the day, I'm sure they would pick up on mistakes that we repeatedly make. But is it embarrassing? Yes, it is. Is it a good look? No, it is not. And will it buy into those that simply say this man is too old to rerun for President of the United States. You bet it will. And it keeps everyone on their toes about whether he may well slip up again, as you say, over the next 48 hours or so.
Yeah, we're going to stay with the pictures here at Phoenix Park because we think that maybe it'll be heading back to the limousine, the so-called beast. As you were saying, Darren, next up is Leo Varadkar, the Taoiseach, and perhaps there will be more discussed about the way forward for the island of Ireland, as it's been described, and what happens about the Good Friday Agreement, with, of course, George Mitchell due in a few days' time.
Yeah, indeed, and also Bill Clinton, it must be said as well.
Yes, yeah, of course.
In Belfast, the anniversaries around the Good Friday Agreement are actually still going on and will do for the next week or so. Again, I think, as I said a little while ago, it is quite extraordinary, this relationship that Ireland has with the United States. I mean, it really is quite unique, particularly for a very small country. I mean, the Taoiseach, Leo Varadkar, met President Biden only last month in the Oval Office. I mean, they meet every year at around St. Patrick's Day, where they have the Shamrock ceremony, and it's not just the Taoiseach, but a whole delegation of Irish politicians travel over to the United States every year, where they have a special meeting in Congress and special trade shows in different American cities. It is difficult to underestimate, and we saw this really during the Brexit negotiations to a degree, just the soft power that this country, this very small island, has over the politics of the world's largest democracy.
Yeah.
And, you know, Leo Varadkar will have met President Biden dozens of times. And as I say, that is quite extraordinary for a very small country for that to happen. They will know each other incredibly well. It'll be mostly pleasantries. I'm not entirely sure there's any proper politics to discuss here. Interestingly, though, Anthony Blinken, the US Secretary of State, is here, which give the impression that there maybe are some serious things to talk about.
Yeah.
But on the whole, this is a very informal visit in which President Biden effectively gets to enjoy a couple of days, revelling in the attention and the warmth of Irish politicians and the public.
And just to reflect, we saw that tree planting ceremony, the oak tree or sapling being planted, and of course reporters reflecting that pretty symbolic, given that we've had John F. Kennedy, Ronald Reagan, Bill Clinton and Barack Obama all planting trees in the same grounds here in Phoenix Park.
Yeah, indeed, and it is a proper ceremony, and it's not just American presidents who get to do that. Queen Elizabeth has done it in the past. She'd done it at the state visit around 10 years ago. Charles de Gaulle, former French president, did it again more than 50 years, 60 years ago. But also those names that you mentioned, interesting, Ronald Reagan, Bill Clinton, Barack Obama, and now Joe Biden. Those are the four US presidents who will have a chance, or have had a chance, to address the Irish Parliament.
Yeah.
But it is, again, it's kind of part of the ceremony, if you like, this tree planting in the Phoenix Park. These trees will outlast all those presidents in years to come, and a reminder again of that close connection, and quite a nice reminder though of people when they've come to visit. It's something that happens all over the world. We know the royal family, for example, they quite like planting trees up and down the UK, don't they, when they go and visit around the country.
Yeah, and I think we've got an indication now what was said when he was ringing the bell, because he went back and rung it a second time for the cameras and reporters. Basically, apparently he said, there's one more for peace. So an indication, of course, this is the message they're pressing home. Darren, thank you for taking us through that. We're awaiting now the beast to leave. That is the car, not the president, of course, with the bomb-proof, bulletproof, gas-proof Cadillac, I think it is, due to leave and then head to this meeting with the Irish Taoiseach, Leo Varadkar. And then, as we say, the joint session of Parliament, the Republic's Parliament, happening in Dublin in the next few hours. And perhaps an indication about this message of peace being pressed home. Tom is back with us in the studio. A lot of symbolism here with the bell being rung, the tree being planted. I'm not quite sure about Michael D. Higgins' dog coming out to play, but I mean, it does add a bit of colour, doesn't it?
It certainly does, and of course we know that Joe Biden is a man who likes dogs himself. So that is a nice, I was about to say poetic moment, but of course the poetry is probably coming a little bit later. But no, this does seem to be a a meeting of two individuals who have very similar feelings towards the island of Ireland, towards the sentimental and indeed other elements of what is a country that means a great deal to the US president.
With a tricolour and the stars are striped either side there on the front of the presidential limousine. I mean, you're talking about poetry, but it's interesting when we looked at what was actually written at some length in the visitors' book there at the residence, and this Irish proverb, your feet will bring you where your heart is. And then talking to reporters, I'm not going home, this is an incredible place. All you American reporters, it's just like the White House, right? Perhaps, obviously, a message for this political campaign that we might get in the coming months back at home for the 2024 presidential election.
Yeah, just over 10% of Americans identify as being in some way Irish American. That equates to around almost 30 million people. It's a sizable voting contingent. So Biden being able to show himself being chummy with the Irish president, looking around to the areas of his roots, all of this imagery, while it's probably not being blasted across every television screen in America, some of it might become useful in a future campaign.
Yeah. A bit of an indication from the press pack, or at least the National Security Council Senior Director Amanda Sloat, who's been...
Oh, it looks like they're really struggling to open that door there. That's a bit of a moment. Oh, about 5 seconds trying to
because that is
the tricky
as
handle
we said,
there.
Bomb-proof, bulletproof, and with gas seals around it as well. Maybe the locking system, the remote locking didn't quite work. But we're just being told by Amanda Sloat, in terms of this address at the joint session of Parliament, it will refer to areas of close partnership between both countries, quote, and setting out a shared vision for the future, and wonders, how much that will be shared with the North and Stormont, and what we will hear from, clearly, President Clinton, or Mr. President Clinton as he is. Of course, they're always called Mr. President, even though they've left office.
Yes.
And George Mitchell as well, Senator George Mitchell, one of the architects.
Who chaired those discussions, the former Senate Majority Leader, put in place by Bill Clinton in the mid-1990s for that process. Of course, we forget the process actually started under John Major. Quite a considerable amount of work was done.
The ceasefire in 1994.
94 or 95 when it came into effect. And that visit then by Clinton in 95, all working through until 1998 when the thing was actually signed. But I think it is interesting listening to the words of President Biden yesterday, speaking at Ulster University, talking about the prospect for investment, talking about the shared prosperity of peace. We haven't yet heard what he's going to say to the Irish Parliament a little bit later today, but I would be very surprised if it was particularly different. It's a shared message of the opportunity of prosperity that can be shared across the island, although there are different communities, although of course, Northern Ireland is part of the United Kingdom and the Republic is an independent state. There is this opportunity for greater cooperation and economic development, most importantly.
Yeah, and the White House saying that Northern Ireland and Ukraine will be top of the agenda as he meets the Taoiseach, Leo Varadkar, shortly. We heard about this message on democracy, of course, in that speech at Ulster University yesterday, with a direct reference to the events of January the 6th on Capitol Hill.
Certainly, and no doubt that will also be a big part of the presidential campaign that is likely shaping up over the course of the next year or so between Donald Trump and Joe Biden. In many ways, a sort of rematch of what we saw in 2020. And of course, in January 2021, the fallout of that will no doubt play a huge part of that election campaign. Many Americans feeling that was something that President Trump handled incredibly poorly. But it is interesting talking about Ukraine because, of course, we've seen two new countries joining NATO in the last year or so, or one has joined, and Finland has joined, and Sweden is on its way to join. Ireland is not a member of NATO. Which is
neutral as well in all other foreign affairs.
Which is an interesting point, because even traditionally neutral countries like Switzerland have been sort of making greater noises towards Ukraine. This Ukraine discussion here with Ireland will be a very interesting one, because many countries that have seen themselves as more neutral in the past are sort of getting on board the NATO train. I wonder to what extent that will become a live issue in the Republic of Ireland, and how much they will...
Well, certainly we were getting indications from our Irish independent correspondent that there are protests at what's is happening in terms of US involvement in those sort of armed conflicts. So clearly that this is still a sensitive issue for the Irish public. And they're just emerging now once more from the portico, as President Biden has indicated many echoes of the White House with those pillars there at the front.
Although the House is somewhat older than the country of the United States.
Yes.
Originally designed by and for one of the gamekeepers of the park.
That is extraordinary.
Who was an amateur architect himself, which is remarkable. The 1750s, this house was constructed. The White House...
A good time to be a gamekeeper, obviously. If that's
a great time to be a gamekeeper. Land basically free, as far as I can make out. But no, the White House was constructed, of course, a while later. It was George Washington never lived in the White House. Of course, it was land that Washington owned that he donated that became Washington, D.C. And the White House was constructed a little bit later. Of course, there is a myth, and I think it is a myth, that it was painted white after the British burnt it down in 1812.
Well, a salute there and a thumbs up as the President heads back into the beast. And let's see if the door closes after the little glitch trying to get it open. And one imagines the security locks that are on that particular rear door. But this part of the visit now coming to a conclusion at the residence in Phoenix Park. So just to remind you now, meeting with the Taoiseach next. The timetable is slipping quite a bit. Delays and probably now this session, the joint session of the Parliaments, which was, I think was due at 3:45, may have to slip, or indeed they try and compress the timetable a little bit there. Michael D. Higgins reflecting on yet another meeting with Joe Biden. This one, of course, a presidential state visit, so hence the red carpet and the Guard of Honour and the band.
Of course, Joe Biden has visited the Republic of Ireland many times across his long career, as Vice President and as a senator in the United States Senate
back to,
as well.
I think he was reflecting 1972 was his first foreign trip. So, yes, he's well-versed in perhaps the arts of diplomacy. And he does have a very relaxed manner in terms of approaching people. But, of course, a lot of political commentators in the States, the wave there and the hand and a return wave as well. As to the levels of energy, engagement, and this so-called cognitive decline that critics have pointed to in the president.
Yes, he is 80, and he, frankly, looks like he is 80. And there are some...
Paul McCartney, who's the same age, one reflects.
Well, there are some people who age, and you're very, very surprised that it turns out that they're the age they are. Joe Biden is not one of those people. It is very clear, and of course, there are many, many advantages to being at the forefront of global politics for such a long time. The connections, the history, the knowledge, but of course, there are drawbacks as well. As people age, they do get less quick on their feet. And I think we have seen that on this visit with Joe Biden as well.
There was the comment about the fact he wasn't coming to the coronation, that perhaps that might have been a reason. But one reflects that, he's got quite an intensive schedule here, and we are being told about the possibility of a state visit later to meet Rishi Sunak. So clearly there are assessments being made as to what happens on the world stage.
And indeed, if a state visit were to take place later this year or indeed early next year, that would be the 5th visit to the United Kingdom that Joe Biden has made as president. That would be more than one time every year of his presidency.
It's not exactly snubbing us.
No, I wouldn't put it like that. And of course, Jill Biden will be coming along to the coronation in the place of Joe Biden.
An official representation of the White House.
Absolutely,
not
which
as a private individual.
Which the Americans do point out. However, there are many on the British side of things who say that, well, this is a huge, huge event, the coronation of the king. This is something that has not taken place, well, for over 70 years. It is, to some extent, surprising that the president hasn't made the time to come over for that one day.
Yeah, but that's the culmination of this particular part at the official residence there in Phoenix Park, in what, as we've been reflecting, is some glorious sunshine, given the difficulties of the weather. And I guess that White House press pack will be looking at the weather forecast for tomorrow because we got the west of Ireland.
Yes, which is traditionally a lot more rainy. You've got all of the weather systems coming in from the Atlantic. It could well be a little bit hairy out there, but hey, it might be as glorious as today has clearly turned out to be.
And interesting because he's got Joe Kennedy on board in that official party, and of course the west of Ireland particularly important for that Kennedy connection. We saw JFK, well, shortly before the assassination.
Yes, 6 months before he was assassinated. I believe it was his final international visit, and such a profound moment for the people of Ireland. I was in Dublin a few months ago, and people really do remember it. There is sort of memorabilia around about that JFK visit. It was such a formative moment for a country that was, to some extent, broken. You had mass migration away from the country. You had the economy of the country doing very, very poorly after the sort of acrimonious break from Britain. You had a very troubled society. It didn't really know what it wanted to be as a country. You had sort of the old socially conservative Catholic power base of politics, but also you had sort of a new young Ireland coming up and a lot of tensions within that republic. And the visit of JFK sort of gave a bit of a spur to a sense of nationhood and a way forward.
Yeah, and of course those political tensions in Boston as well, the Kennedy power base, and all those playing out on the other side of the Atlantic. Tom, thank you for that, and we'll leave the official residence there in Phoenix Park in its glorious sunshine. But just to update you, of course, he'll be meeting the Taoiseach via Varadkar, and then that joint session of Parliament will keep you updated with all the latest here live on GB News. Stay with us.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage. Here on GB News, we will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop
failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
And welcome back to GB News Live with me, Mark Longhurst, as we continue to cover this presidential visit with Joe Biden, who's now left Phoenix Park, the official residence of the Irish President, Michael D. Higgins. He's now on his way to here, which is Farmley House, still in Dublin, of course, to meet the Taoiseach Leo Varadkar. I'm just looking at my official White House timetable here, and I'm afraid it is slipping because this particular occasion was supposed to be at 1 o'clock, so we're running at least 45 minutes late because at this particular time, 1:40, Joe Biden was supposed to be attending a youth Gaelic sports demonstration outside Farmley House. So obviously they're having to rejig. The importance of this, though, is because at 3:45, President Biden due to address both houses of the Republic's Parliament at Leinster House in Dublin. So there'll be a lot of rejigging going on behind the scenes. But the official guard of honour there now waiting at Farmley House. And we are being told by the White House press spokesman that this will be an issue or where the issue of Northern Ireland and Ukraine will be discussed with the Taoiseach, because clearly there was much focus yesterday on what was being said about the Good Friday Agreement 25 years on and moving that process forward in terms of power sharing at Stormont. And as we've heard from Joe Biden, we have George Mitchell, who was Senator George Mitchell at the time, one of the architects and the chairman getting that Good Friday Agreement together, arriving shortly, as will former President Bill Clinton. So we'll perhaps get a further indication of what may be happening behind the scenes to try and move the process on, and whether Dublin will be able to assist in that in terms of getting Stormont back up and running. But clearly we had the indication from the DUP, Sir Geoffrey Donaldson, that these various pronouncements from the President will not change anything. That is up, they said, to the British government and the process concerning the so-called Windsor Framework. We can see the police outriders now arriving, the Garda, Irish police force, and then the Beast will be on its way, that presidential Cadillac, the big limousine. And certainly indications that the sun is still out with the White House press pack, the Irish press reporters following every move of the president, as we heard from... There we go, another different angle here to see the vehicles arriving at the front of Farmley House. But we were being told that this is not exactly being followed minute by minute by the Irish public, but it's certainly striking a chord with them and what the President is saying. Let's have a listen in to hear the Guard welcoming. Oh, that might be the decoy car, I think. So the real presidential limousine might be following. They always have two running. One is either a decoy or a backup vehicle. So the Guard was called to attention a little early for that. But we'll stay with these pictures. Tom's still with us here in the studio. Oh, it's waiting there in the shade of that tree to get the signal.
The backup car, it includes several pints of the President's blood.
I wonder what you're going to say, though. Several pints of Guinness for this particular visit. I don't know.
Well, potentially that would be needed to get things back on track, or maybe that would maybe that's why things are so delayed.
Yeah, and not quite as grand a facade here, but certainly still it's an official guard of honour to welcome that car. And one wonders what's happening behind the scenes, Tom, in terms of this timetable slipping minute by minute.
Yes, well, potentially there's too many pints of Guinness being drunk, but it does seem that there are... I'm sorry, is
I
there...
think we've got a problem with your mic there. We've been talking so much, your batteries have run out. But I'll keep... Hopefully my batteries will keep going for a while yet, because we've still got this official reception with the Taoiseach to take place. We don't quite know why the presidential limousine, the Beast, is in the shade of the trees there, whether they're perhaps trying to rejig this particular address to the Irish Parliament, which was due at 3:45. Just to remind you, this occasion was supposed to happen at 1 o'clock 50 minutes ago, so it is getting later and later. And one wonders whether the demonstration of Gaelic football or Gaelic sports might be the thing that is actually jettisoned to get them back on track. We hope not, because clearly they'd have been practising to show off their skills for Joe Biden on that. I think we put some new batteries in you, Tom, have we?
We have. Hopefully,
Excellent. There we are.
I can now be heard. And
the sun back out right on cue for that as well. Yeah, not quite as grand a building, but still very much at the centre of this wonderful sort of Georgian neoclassic design that's so prevalent in Dublin.
Absolutely. It has long been said that that Dublin was, and I need to get this right, because there is a phrase which was, it was an Irish village. What was it? Was it a Viking settlement, then an English city, and now a European capital? There's something like that.
In that order.
I will try and get it right next time. But no, it is interesting, of course, because what President Biden did with planting that tree in the grounds of the presidential residence is following in a long line of other tree planters. Barack Obama, his Democratic predecessor as president, planted a tree in his state visit to Ireland. John F. Kennedy planted one as well. Indeed, also the late Queen Elizabeth II planted a tree in her famous visit to Ireland as well. So following all those steps in quite a poignant way.
Yeah, and we'll just reflect, of course, on what the President had written in that official visitor's book there with Michael D. Higgins, referring to this Irish proverb, your feet will bring you where your heart is. Well, it's taking him to quite a few locations across Dublin. In terms of that residence, I'm not going home, he told those American reporters, the White House press pack. Isn't this an incredible place? All you American reporters, it's just like the White House, right? Well, this isn't quite in the same league, but it's still impressive enough. And then, obviously, I think Leinster House will be the next location. We're just getting a bit more, Tom, on in terms of those who will be there for this particular address, because you were reflecting that he'll be accompanied to that Irish Parliament by Marie Heaney, the widow of his favourite poet, Seamus Heaney.
Yes, and Seamus Heaney, of course, that famous 20th century poet in Ireland, one of those, of a group of poets, really, that President Biden has throughout his life really respected and learnt the work of. There have been many occasions, indeed in public, where the President will start reciting Irish poetry from memory. And maybe this is what fills his head up. Maybe he's learnt so much Irish poetry that he can't remember the names of rugby teams.
Yes, referring to the fact they call the All Blacks, the New Zealand team, the Black and Tans, which has got some particularly sensitive connotation, of course, for the British military forces and what they did in the Republic.
I believe there are one or two IRA songs about the Black and Tans.
Indeed, yeah. Maybe he was remembering those songs as well, who knows? Anyway, just to reflect in terms of the party that will attend this parliamentary address, 9 members of the US Congress, 1 senator, Joe Biden's sister Valerie, son Hunter, as well as former Irish President Mary McAleese, 2 former Irish leaders, Bertie Ahern and Enda Kenny, Northern Ireland political leaders as well, including Sinn Féin's leader from Stormont. So clearly, you know, there are... it's starting to creep forward. So
they're teasing us.
Yeah, obviously they're indicating that their timetable is is back on some kind of even keel now, but one wonders what the Secret Service are doing behind the scenes when these things are usually choreographed minute to the minute.
They certainly are, but we are now seeing, of course, the beast, the real one this time, roll up in front of that red car.
Without the presidential blood supplies, but there we are. Maybe a few other refreshments in the back there. And the salutes. There's Leo Varadkar waiting there, patiently. Secret Service checking left and right to the car before they open the limousine door. And there is the lead agent there. They're still looking around. Even though this is official government location, their
security is incredibly tight.
Security is pretty tight, isn't it? Beautiful day, the President says. He's taken his sunglasses off. Difficult to tell him apart from the Secret Service cohort there with all the dark glasses. And away for the cameras, and inside they go. Now, we are being told Northern Ireland and Ukraine will be on the list in terms of discussions. But you were touching on something quite interesting there, Tom, about Ireland's place within the world community and the protests that we've heard about the American position on direct involvement in these various conflicts.
Yes, it is interesting. If you look at a map of NATO, it spans just about every European country. The border between NATO and Russia has expanded massively with the ascension of Finland. And, of course, Sweden is due to join next. In terms of those European countries that are not in NATO, looking at that map, it really only stands out that Austria, Switzerland and Ireland are those sitting out of the NATO umbrella. And it is an interesting point. Of course, Ireland has always seen itself as a non-aligned country when it comes to conflict. It wants to be seen as neutral.
And I'm proud of that neutrality.
But it is difficult to be neutral in the face of the evil of the Putin regime. In the face of a regime that puts out videos of beheading combatants.
And indeed, Joe Biden talking about the defence of democracy in that address to the University of Ulster yesterday in Belfast, and, of course, referring to the events of January the 6th on the Capitol Hill. But there we are, the guard there leaving the front of Farmley House. The President is inside to hold this meeting with Leo Varadkar. I don't know if we'll get a picture from inside Farmley House, but one thing just to alert you that the President was due to view this demonstration of young Gaelic Games players outside Farmley House. Now, we don't know whether that's actually going to still take place because this is running almost an hour late now because he has got this session of the joint houses of the Irish Parliament, Leinster House, due at 3:45, and clearly they'll be wanting to make up time in some way.
Now, I don't think there are any cameras inside this particular stage of the visit. This is a much more practical, work-orientated stage of the visit. Of course, the Taoiseach, the Irish Prime Minister, runs the executive of Ireland, runs the government. The President is much more of a ceremonial figurehead. And so we did see inside, we saw the signing of the book, we saw all of those elements of the visit there. Much more ceremonial before. Now there's some work to be done. No doubt a joint statement will be issued after this bilateral meeting between the Taoiseach and the US President. So this potentially the most worky part of the President's day.
And it's interesting that certainly in terms of the various utterances we've had from the White House spokesman on this, they're trying to keep the press pack on side because there were quite a few difficult moments on the statement about perhaps Biden being anti-UK. That was stamped on pretty quickly. Then we had this gaffe about the black and tans instead of the all blacks. So they're clearly still sensitive about what is being said and seen on the worldwide stage.
Absolutely, and particularly what the reverberations of what happens now in the Republic how that will be felt in Northern Ireland as well. That always has to be something that the President has in the back of his mind. As you were saying, there will be Northern Ireland political figures at this dinner tonight, and no doubt that will be part of the conversation. And obviously it will be part of this conversation that the President is currently undertaking with the Taoiseach as well.
Now, we saw the pictures at that hotel in Belfast of the President having tea, not coffee, which is being in itself taken as being significant with Joe Biden. We're getting a bit more. Chris Philp, the Home Office Minister, he was doing the rounds today. He's been saying that Rishi Sunak's interaction, as he called it, with Joe Biden involved extensive discussions, although the White House had characterised those as broad and general. It was a bilateral meeting. I mean, there was the fear that perhaps it was scaled back to this chat over a cup of tea, but indications perhaps there was more in terms of matters of substance.
Yes, I'm not sure to what extent Chris Philp has a detailed account of what went on, but whenever a government minister goes on these media rounds in the morning, they are given lines by Number 10. They're told, in effect, what to say by the Number 10 operation. So that's an indication of what Number 10 would like us to hear about what was going on between Rishi Sunak and Joe Biden. Again, not a formal bilateral meeting, but certainly lots of things that were discussed there.
OK, so we have the meeting underway, we believe, here at Farmley House between the President, Joe Biden, and the Irish Prime Minister, the Taoiseach, Leo Varadkar. As we get more, we'll update you. But let's get an update now, as it's just gone 2 o'clock, rather. Time flies when you're enjoying yourself. Polly's waiting for us with all the news headlines.
Mark, thanks very much indeed. It is just after 2 o'clock. You're with GB News. Our top story today. As you've been hearing, the US President Joe Biden has been on his way to meet with Ireland's Taoiseach Leo Varadkar at Farmley House in Dublin. He's just arrived. He's also due to address the Irish Parliament later on. Well, a short while ago, President Biden met with Ireland's President Michael D. Higgins at his official residence in Phoenix Park. The pair took part in a tree planting ceremony and also rang the ceremonial peace bell. This is the second day of a 3-day visit to the Republic of Ireland for the President. And when signing in the Irish President's Visitors Book, Joe Biden said he didn't want to go home.
It's an honour to return, and I talk about returning again to the home of my ancestors, to celebrate the things that bind Ireland and the United States and recommit ourselves to peace, equity, and I think the most Irish of words used in my family was dignity. And dignity. Anyway, thank you all very much. And I'm not going home. I'm staying here. Isn't this an incredible place?
Joe Biden speaking in the Republic of Ireland today. We'll, of course, keep you up to date with events in Ireland throughout the day here on GB News. Now, in other news, the Chancellor says the outlook for the UK economy is brighter than expected, despite new figures showing there was no growth in the month of February. Data from the Office for National Statistics shows a 0.4% decrease in GDP, that's gross domestic product, from January. The services sector also fell, with the ONS blaming strike action by teachers and civil servants. A fall in gas and electric usage due to milder weather was also responsible, they say, but the figures do show GDP grew 0.1% in the 3 months to February, with Jeremy Hunt saying the UK will avoid recession. The Deputy Labour leader, Angela Rayner, however, says the government has failed to help people.
Well, the economy figures that came out today are very devastating. It shows that productivity and the growth in the economy has been completely flatlined, and we've seen that from the IMF that have said that they don't believe that's going to get any better this year. So that is having an impact on people. Energy bills are going up, their mortgages and rents are going up, their food prices are going up, and the government have failed to help families, which has a knock-on effect on the economy and growth, because if people haven't got money to spend, then that will affect, growth in this country.
8 serving and former Met police officers have been found guilty of gross misconduct over discriminatory and offensive messages that they sent. The officers, 7 men and 1 woman, were found to have sent sexist, racist, homophobic, transphobic and disablist comments in a WhatsApp group chat. During the 5th day of the hearing, the legal chair described the breach of standards as so serious it justified dismissal. A 74-year-old man has been extradited from Pakistan and charged with the murder of a female police officer over 17 years ago. 38-year-old WPC Sharon Beshanivsky was shot in 2005 while responding to a robbery in Bradford in Yorkshire. Pirandita Khan appeared in court today for a brief hearing before being remanded back into custody. He's due to appear at the Old Bailey on Monday. Now, the body of a woman has been found washed up on the beach after a search operation off Brighton Palace Pier last night. Coast Guard helicopters and the RNLI were involved in the rescue effort, which was launched yesterday afternoon after reports of a person being blown into the sea. The heavy winds of Storm Noah last night made the search efforts very challenging. Sussex Police saying an investigation is underway. Demonstrations have continued in France on the 12th day of the national strikes there. Hundreds of railway workers gathered at Paris's Gare de Lyon station to protest against Emmanuel Macron's plans to increase the pension age by 2 years to 64. Opinion polls in France show a wide majority of voters still oppose the reforms. And so tomorrow, the Constitutional Council will decide whether or not the law can be applied in France. The Royal Mint is set to release a new range of commemorative coins featuring a crowned portrait of His Majesty the King for the very first time. The collection depicts King Charles III wearing the Tudor crown, which he personally chose for the portrait. A 50p and a £5 coin will be released later this month, ahead of his coronation in May. You're with GB News, Britain's news channel.
Polly, thanks very much indeed. So let's take you back to Dublin's fair city where the sun is shining. So US President Joe Biden reflecting that it is a great day, he said, and indications that the Irish Taoiseach Leo Varadkar has agreed with him, saying, yes, the sun's come out for you. They're holding bilateral talks as we speak at Farmley House, the official Irish state guest house. Shortly before, he met Irish President Michael D. Higgins at the residence in Phoenix Park, not far away, still in Dublin. Then later, he'll be addressing both houses of the Irish Parliament. Let's bring in our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, who's been following all these events, as indeed will the Secret Service detail, indicating that they are already, I think, an hour behind schedule, Darren.
Yeah, things definitely overrunning here in Dublin. There's no doubt about that. Mark, quite incredible when you look at the size of the motorcade that's following Joe Biden around. It really is quite extensive, not least of all, though, as you've rightly pointed out, he's travelling with a bit of an entourage. He's got his sister and his son alongside him on this visit, and also members of Congress and one senator as well. They're all going to be at the Oireachtas, the Irish Parliament here in the centre of Dublin. Farmley House, where the President is at the moment, with the Taoiseach, the Prime Minister Leo Varadkar, is just on the edge of the Phoenix Park, the largest inner city park in Europe. It's also where the US Ambassador's residence is, as well as the Irish President's residence, Aras and Uthron. Now, the talks with Leo Varadkar be a bit more political in tone. The Irish President is the symbolic head of state. He doesn't really have much political power, whereas the Irish Taoiseach, the Prime Minister, does. The Prime Minister or the Taoiseach doesn't have an official residence. Farmley House is as close as it gets. It's normally the residence where they welcome foreign visitors. And it sounds that, like Ukraine, a bit of Northern Ireland will be on the agenda for those talks. There is interesting discussion here in Ireland at the moment about the country's long-standing neutrality. It has not supplied any weapons, for example, to Ukraine in the most recent conflict, though it has taken in tens of thousands of Ukrainian refugees. But as I say, there are many people, including, it must be said, Leo Varadkar, who said that maybe the question of neutrality needs to be open to question.
Yeah, we just got a shot now inside Farmley House. And Leo Varadkar speaking.
Here, I think, back in 2017, in a different time. That was a private visit, but it's wonderful to have you back in Ireland. And I think the visit's been going extremely well, and you very much grace us with your presence, and look forward to the meeting later on.
Well, it was great to see you in St. Patrick's Day. It was great to see you in Washington. You know, I think there really is an opportunity to make serious progress, not just because of the accords that were signed 25 years ago, but I mean, just in terms of the way you're leading Ireland. Ireland is moving in a way that is taking its place in the world. It's working on helping countries around the world that are dealing with starvation, the way you've welcomed, and I know it's not easy, to welcome Ukrainians here, and the leadership you've shown. And I just think that it feels so good to be able to have this emerging and stronger relationship between the United States and Ireland. I think our values are the same, and I think our concerns are the same. So I'm really looking forward to continuing to work with you.
Thank you. And look forward later on to hearing about your visit to Belfast and your meeting with the party leaders. We're very keen to see the Good Friday Agreement institutions functioning again, and Prime Minister Sunak and I are going to be working together on that, but really want to thank you and your administration and your country's leadership when it comes to Ukraine, because I never thought in my lifetime that we'd see a war of this nature happen in Europe again, and democracy and liberty and the things that we believe in are in retreat in large parts of the world. And if it wasn't for American leadership, and if it wasn't for America and Europe working together, I don't know what kind of world we live in. So we really do appreciate your leadership and your personal leadership, both in terms of securing peace in Ireland, but also in trying to protect democracy and liberty here in Europe.
Well, I think what you and Prime Minister Sunak worked out in terms of the other accords was very valuable as well. So I'm looking forward to talking to you about a lot of this in detail. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
So, cutting straight to the chase there in terms of those remarks, they are indeed putting the Good Friday Agreement and, as Tom was indicating, Ukraine at the top of the agenda for their talks. Interesting that those were quite pointed, Tom, in terms of the opportunity to make real progress, not Ireland taking its place in the world, but then obviously welcoming Ukrainians, a stronger relationship with the US, with Ireland. But then, Leo Varadkar, very keen to see the Good Friday agreements working again. Clearly, what happened yesterday in Belfast is a precursor to something more substantial here at Farmley House.
Yes, and I think that really what we're going to see is positive noises from the Americans, the promise of investment, the opportunity that peace can provide economically for the island of Ireland, but particularly for Northern Ireland as well. And we mustn't forget Northern Ireland is the poorest part of the United Kingdom. Despite the massive wealth transfer that goes along, it still hasn't quite caught up with the rest of the country. And there is opportunity there for that investment. That's what Biden is promising, but he knows he can't go too far. He knows he can't cajole people into forcing these institutions to work. In many ways, he's closer to the Republican side of things rather than the unionist side of things, the nationalist communities rather than the unionist communities. And in many ways, it's the unionist communities that need to be spoken to the most and need to have the most offered to.
And therefore, he's got to handle this very carefully. I mean, it's interesting, after he rang that peace bell outside the residence there in Phoenix Park, I hope that the government begins to function as it used to in terms of functioning as a representative body in the North, speaking about Stormont. I think that's necessary, and that's for you all to decide, not for me to decide. Clearly, he is showing he is cognizant of the various sensitivities in this.
Absolutely, and there are many ways that he could put his foot wrong here. He could make things worse rather than better if it seems like this is the guy who sees himself as the Irish-American coming over here, telling the Ulster Unionists, the DUP, all the rest of them what to do. He doesn't want to do that. And I think that the promise here of American investment is the only tool that he really has. That and the idea that peace itself has these dividends. We're going to hear more about that. But more widely as well, I think it was really interesting when Biden said that Ireland is sort of ready to take its make itself felt in the world. I think
Yeah.
if I were an Irish person listening to that, I'd be, well, aren't we already in the world? So what could he possibly mean by that? And then we get to this point of Irish neutrality, the fact that no arms have been supplied to Ukraine, the fact that Ireland sits outside of institutions like NATO. Potentially that's what Biden's hinting at there.
Yeah, although obviously welcoming the fact that they have Ukrainians being housed and welcomed to Ireland as a result. So, well, let's bring in Darren, our political editor, who's still following the timetable, which, as we said, has slipped. But clearly they're not going to try and rush these talks, Darren, given their importance. And an indication, too, from Leah Varadkar about, democracy, liberty, and in retreat in large parts of the world. I mean, there may well be a hint there, a reconsideration of Ireland's place in the world order.
Yeah, and that is something that Leah Varadkar has expressed actually over the last couple of months, that maybe Ireland needs to rethink again about its place in the world in terms of neutrality. Really, since the inception of the states back in the 1920s, Ireland has remained neutral in conflicts around the world. It does send peacekeepers, it must be said, through the United Nations to places like Lebanon and sub-Saharan Africa, but more notably, of course, it remained neutral during the Second World War even, and that is also true in the case of Ukraine. Now, as you would have heard there from Leah Varadkar, though that is not to say clearly it thinks what is happening in Ukraine is morally or legally right. Ireland has expressed its contempt for Russia's actions in that country, but it has not gone as far as other European nations in terms of supplying weapons. What it has done, though, is taken a very significant number of Ukrainian refugees, much more than the UK in terms of the percentage of this population per capita, if you like. And it's been a bit controversial, it must be said here. Tens of thousands have come. There's not necessarily been the adequate housing supply. It's put pressure on certain parts of the country, and it's led to demonstrations as well. So it's not necessarily been an easy process. And on the remarks about Northern Ireland, as we talked about yesterday, Joe Biden trying to walk this tightrope, if you like, as you and Tom have been talking about, trying not to offend unionism while at the same time trying to encourage the restoration of Stormont. And it is one of the reasons that I think he spent so little time in Northern Ireland, and it's something I think the United States always faces. If it becomes too politically muscular or aggressive in some ways, it's interfering, and if it doesn't do enough, it's seen to be neglecting things. It's the troublesome nature of being still the world's policeman, if you like. If you go too far, as I say, you're viewed to be interfering, and if you do too little, you're seen not necessarily care. And that's been the difficulties of Joe Biden's visit to Northern Ireland yesterday.
Yeah, just looking at that quote after he'd rung the peace bell, that phrase that we heard yesterday in Belfast at the university, that's for you all to decide, not for me to decide. But clearly what he does want to do is indicate the benefits and what may result from moving this forward. I mean, he spoke yesterday in Belfast about what might come in terms of US direct investment and moving the economy forward. I mean, do we believe that might still be the same here in Dublin in terms of the stronger ties between Ireland and the US?
Yeah, it's quite interesting, isn't it, that those deep ties between the United States and Ireland, you only have to stand in this city in Dublin to see how prosperous it's become in the last 10, 20, 30 years or so. And that's been largely driven by a lot of American investment. The global headquarters outside of the United States of companies like Facebook are based here. PayPal, eBay, some really big American corporations have got a large presence here. Google, Intel, Microsoft. They employ tens of thousands of Irish people on very high wages. They've helped contribute to an enormous growth in Irish productivity. We often talk about how stagnant growth has been in the UK. It is far from that here in Ireland. We have seen enormous growth in GDP even since the financial crisis more than 10 years ago, and that has really contributed to wealth here in the Irish Republic. Now, that is not true in Northern Ireland. President Biden did talk about how the economy had more than doubled in size since the Good Friday Agreement. Some economists do doubt that, though the economy has grown. But as Thomas rightly pointed out, Northern Ireland is by far the most socially deprived part of these British Isles. And clearly Joe Biden is hoping, by waving that carrot of potentially billions of dollars of American investment, if Stormont is back up and running again, that will coax, if you like, the DUP, potentially after the local elections in Northern Ireland next month, to think again about the Windsor Framework and to think again about the restoration of the Northern Ireland Assembly.
Indeed. Darren, thank you for that. Just to reiterate that we've got the discussion going on inside Farmley House there between Leo Varadkar and Joe Biden. The beast, the president's motorcade, is still waiting outside because we were due to get a demonstration by youngsters of Gaelic sports, Gaelic football. Whether that still takes place, we don't know, because the timetable's slipping badly, because we have got this joint session of Parliament due at 3:45 to hear from the President. We'll keep you updating on that. Also, the latest on the King's coronation. Who's going and who's staying at home? Details in a moment.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Click that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions are, those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway, Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We've got a brand new lineup every Saturday night on GB News.
From 6 p.m, I'll give you my unique take on the world today.
Then at 7, it's me, Calvin Robinson, with my Common Sense Crusade.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
5 times the opinion. Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
And at 9, of course, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Brand new Saturday nights on GB News, Britain's news channel.
And welcome back to GB News Live. We'll keep you updated, of course, with the presidential visit in Ireland. But let's now reflect on Buckingham Palace confirming that the Duke of Sussex, Prince Harry, will be attending the King's coronation. Hopes, perhaps, of a reconciliation with his father, the King, and maybe his brother too. But Meghan will not be attending the ceremony because it is their son Archie's 4th birthday as well. So plenty to keep her busy at home in California. Well, Prince Harry has not been seen with the royal family since his memoir Spare was published and the other various interviews given on television channels. Our royal reporter Cameron Walker can join us now down at the place that will be the focus, of course, Westminster Abbey. And just to touch on that first, Cameron, we understand that the Duke will be attending the coronation at the Abbey, but perhaps will not be seen in the procession or back at Buckingham Palace.
Yes, so yesterday, Mark, Buckingham Palace confirms that Prince Harry will be attending the coronation ceremony happening in the building behind me, Westminster Abbey. From my understanding, the flypast on the balcony will not include Prince Harry or indeed the Duke of York. We are expecting only working members of the royal family on that balcony, although that has not been confirmed by Buckingham Palace. As for the procession, again, I think it's unlikely we will see Prince Harry in that procession. We are perhaps expecting the Wales's 3 children, Prince George, Princess Charlotte and Prince Louis in that. Of course, Prince George is also going to be one of the King's pages, so he's got a special role on the day. But it's been a pretty fractious relationship, hasn't it, between the Sussexes and the rest of the royal family in recent months. As you said, it is the first time we're going to see Prince Harry with his extended members of the royal family, because of since the since the Netflix series and indeed the memoir Spare coming out as well. So it's going to be an interesting time. But as for reconciliation between Prince Harry and his brother Prince William and indeed the King, I think perhaps it's unlikely. It's a very fleeting visit, we're being told.
And the interesting question, where's he going to sit? Who will it be next to? I mean, much being made in the press of the fact he still has a relationship with Princess Eugenie, and also the fact that Prince Edward, or Duke of Edinburgh as he is now, has previously been seen to sort of being more approachable. This will all have to be coordinated to a degree.
Yeah, it certainly will, Mark, and that's been reported in the papers over the last few weeks, hasn't it? The headache for Buckingham Palace in terms of the seating plan. I suspect a situation what we had for A, the late Queen's Platinum Jubilee service in St Paul's Cathedral, and B, the Queen's funeral in Westminster Abbey, where we will see Prince Harry sat with the royal family, extended members of his family, although I doubt he'll be on the front row with the Prince and Princess of Wales, funnily enough. Yes, for the Queen's funeral, him and Meghan were sat directly behind the King and Queen consort. For the Platinum Jubilee celebrations at St Paul's Cathedral, Meghan was actually sat behind a pillar and they were about 5 rows back. So yes, not on the front row, but he'll definitely be sat with family, we're led to believe. But again, Buckingham Palace has not confirmed the seating plan, so we'll have to wait and see.
Now, the other issue, of course, Cameron, is security, and we reflect on what the Duke of Sussex has said in this row, if you like, over the official security detail, even though he's appeared at court with what appeared to be a private security cohort. Now, I understand the Policing Minister, Chris Philp, has said that the whole question will be assessed on a case-by-case basis. He said, what does that actually mean?
Well, exactly that. They are going to have to decide on Prince Harry's security arrangements. Of course, he's no longer a working member of the royal family, and the deadline for him to accept the coronation invite was the 3rd of April, which was 9 days ago. And that is for the Home Office to put the complicated logistics in place for his security, travelling from the airport to Frogmore Cottage and then from Frogmore Cottage here into central London. And he's no longer a working member of the royal family, so he no longer has that taxpayer-funded police protection, except, and this is the key point which I think some people forget sometimes, except for kind of official state events which he is attending as a member of the royal family. So he still gets police protection for that in the wider security arrangements for the royal family. But of course, this is all happening at the same time that Prince Harry is continuing his legal battle with the Home Office over their decision not to allow him to pay for his own police protection. So it will be a similar situation to the Queen's funeral and the Platinum Jubilee celebrations when he comes over.
Now, what about all the other preparations, given, as you said, they've had to have certain things on hold? We're told that King Charles has only really enjoyed a very short, not a dress rehearsal as such, but in terms of going through what is quite a complicated process there in the Abbey on the day.
Yeah, in fact, today our very own GB News' Camilla Tominey reported in the Telegraph that there's been one informal walkthrough inside Buckingham Palace in the ballroom where they've built this makeshift Westminster Abbey, as we understand it, including a ramp so the king doesn't trip over his robes. Obviously, this is all just reports. It's not been confirmed by Buckingham Palace. But we are expecting in the next few weeks a bit of a ramp up in terms of rehearsals for the King and Queen Consort to go through the choreography, as it were, of the day. And we are expecting, according to Camilla Tominey in the Telegraph, reported today, that there will be a dress rehearsal inside Westminster Abbey. We think rumoured to be the week before the coronation, so that Saturday before. I think it's the 29th of April, where they all presumably walk up the aisle and then sit on the coronation chair, etc. But it's all that choreography. Of course, it's the first coronation for 70 years, so there is a lot to get right and a lot of people watching.
Yeah, and obviously indications that there'll be a huge worldwide audience for the very reason that, of course, we're going to be seeing where Prince Harry sits and who he talks to. But that's for the day itself. Cameron, for the moment, thank you for updating us outside the Abbey. And, of course, we'll have you updated with all the latest as we get it. Just to remind you, we're being told that we've got the concert Windsor Castle on May the 7th as part of this three-day weekend, and then the coronation big lunch, and on Monday, May the 8th, the big Help Out volunteering drive. All the details being released, all the latest here on GB News Live. Let's get an update now on all the headlines. Polly's waiting for us.
Mark, thank you. The top stories this hour on GB News. As you've been seeing, the US President Joe Biden has met with Ireland's Taoiseach Leo Varadkar in Dublin in the last half hour, and earlier today he visited President Michael D. Higgins at his official residence. An armed guard was on standby around the building in Phoenix Park to welcome the US President. The two leaders took part in a tree planting ceremony and also took time to ring the ceremonial peace bell. Well, President Biden's also due to address the Irish Parliament later on today on the second of a three-day visit to the Republic of Ireland. Signing in on the visitor's book, Joe Biden said he didn't feel like going home.
It's an honour to return, and I talk about returning again to the home of my ancestors, to celebrate the things that bind Ireland and the United States and recommit ourselves to peace, equity, and I think the most Irish of words used in my family was dignity and dignity. So, anyway, thank you all very much. And I'm not going home. I'm staying here. Isn't this an incredible place?
Full coverage of Joe Biden's visit to the Republic of Ireland throughout the rest of the day on GB News. Meanwhile, the Chancellor says the outlook for the UK economy is brighter than expected, despite new figures showing there was no growth in the month of February. Data from the Office for National Statistics shows a 0.4% decrease in gross domestic product from January. The services sector fell, we understand, with the ONS blaming strike action by teachers and civil servants and a fall in gas and electricity usage due to milder weather. Now, 8 serving and former Met police officers have been found guilty of gross misconduct over discriminatory and offensive messages they sent online. The officers, including 7 men and 1 woman, were found to have sent sexist, racist, homophobic, transphobic and disablist comments in a WhatsApp group chat. During the 5th day of the hearing, the legal chair described the breach of standards as so serious it justified dismissal. You're up to date on TV, online, DAB+ radio and the TuneIn app. You're with GB News.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Let's bring you up to date now with a quick snapshot of today's markets. And the pounds will buy you $1.2523 and €1.1335. The price of gold, if you fancy an ounce, is £1,631.81. The FTSE 100 is down at the moment at 7,846.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for physical investment.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat.
Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
And welcome back to GB News Live. Let's update you on the state of the economy, state of politics indeed, because Labour's Shadow Chancellor says growth in the UK is on the floor. Well, the latest figures from the Office for National Statistics suggests the UK's economy flatlined in February. Manufacturing output, a key part of levelling up, of course, down 0.2%. So has Chancellor Jeremy Hunt's recent budget helped or hindered efforts to level up the UK? Our economics and business editor Liam Halligan now reports from the West Midlands, Britain's manufacturing hub.
Builders are busy in Birmingham, the UK's second biggest city. But is the government's flagship levelling up policy, spreading wealth from the southeast to the Midlands and north, now a reality?
This is Victoria Square in central Birmingham, one of several public spaces in the city that's been getting a much-needed facelift. But to what extent does levelling up extend beyond city centres to towns across Britain's regions?
Material prices have increased significantly.
In Walsall, 10 miles from central Birmingham, PP Control and Automation manufactures internal control systems which operate complex machinery. With 230 workers, PP is expanding fast. But CEO Tony Haig says the recent rise in corporation tax and still sky-high energy bills will hurt companies across the Midlands.
I think levelling up is a complete and utter joke and has been a political slogan for some time. I don't see any evidence whatsoever of any genuine activity around levelling up.
In his budget 3 weeks ago, Jeremy Hunt announced low-tax investment zones, including parts of Birmingham. But the leader of the city's Labour-run council says levelling up isn't happening.
The Office of Budget Responsibility are forecasting a downgrading of the UK growth over the coming 12 months as a result of the Conservative budget. So I think it was very, very disappointing. We're also faced with the cost of living crisis right across the city. And again, the OBR are saying that living standards are going to have their hardest hit since the 1950s. So I don't think the budget offered very much.
Birmingham has a Labour council, but the West Midlands as a whole has a Tory mayor. Andy Street says the new investment zones will encourage growth, making levelling up a reality.
We're standing in what you would probably say is Britain's best and biggest, most successful enterprise zone here in the city centre. That has definitely bolstered growth. We've seen behind you HSBC coming in, Goldman Sachs coming in there. They probably wouldn't have done to this location if it hadn't been for that status. So we've learned from that. We've proposed to government those new measures. They've agreed that will definitely bolster growth.
So what do ordinary Brummies say? Is levelling up just a slogan?
I think it's always going to be London, and always has been, really. I can't really see that happening. I think that's always going to be the case. It's where the money is.
Yeah, it's written, but there are some areas that they are not really working on.
Probably a gimmick, like most things are. So, but that's as much as I know about it.
As the economy struggles to recover and manufacturers fight on, the success or otherwise of levelling up could decide the next general election. Yet even in Birmingham city centre, this flagship policy is, at best, a work in progress. Liam Halligan, GB News, in Birmingham.
Let's get more now with Liam joining us live in this studio for On the Money. Perhaps not quite levelling up, but just level, flatlining economy, no recession, but, where's the growth going to come from? Even though Jeremy Hunt's trying to sort of talk it up a bit today.
I think the economy is uninspiring at the moment, but it could have been a lot worse. Think back just a few weeks ago, we had the Bank of England, we had the Office of Budget Responsibility, we had the IMF, all of them saying that the UK would be in recession during the first quarter of 2023. Well, the scores are in, if you like, and we're not in recession, though it isn't very inspiring. We can look at the numbers here, Mark. In February, UK GDP, as Gordon Brown once said, it expanded by 0%. So it flatlined. You remember that? Yeah. It flatlined. Within that, the mighty service sector, that's 60 to 70% of our economy, that was down 0.1%, largely because of strikes, it must be said, by teachers and civil servants and others. Construction did pretty well. We had decent weather in February, quite a mild period. So construction surged 2.4%. Materials for construction workers are a bit easier to get hold of now than they were during lockdown with the supply chain issues, though, of course, they're still more expensive. And there's the production sector there, down 0.2%. That does include manufacturing. That's better than it was during January, but still a net subtraction to the economy. And this is what I was trying to get at when I did that film just there from Birmingham.
Yeah, because, I mean, clearly, there's a political aspect to this in terms of what happens to the government with, maybe 18 months away from a general election.
Yeah.
How do they get the feel-good factor back? But it is interesting. I mean, the ONS, Office of National Statistics, a boost in retailing, many shops having a buoyant month. So there's lots of different signals about what's actually happening out there.
They are very mixed signals, Mark, which means it's not all doom and gloom. Yeah. There are pockets of strength. Retailing has been a pocket of strength. Construction there, as I just said. Travel and tourism, as I just said. And the coronation, of course, will give us an extra boost early next month. But look, unless the Tories can hang on to some of those red wall seats they took from Labour, often for the first time ever, in the Midlands, in the North, at the next general election, which, as you say, is probably going to be the autumn of 2024, that seems to be where the political runes are being...
Yeah, we've got the signals about that.
Are being read. But unless the Tories can hang on to those seats, they're going to lose the next election. And whether or not they hang on to those seats will depend on whether this idea of levelling up is seen by people in the Midlands and the North as just a slogan or something that's actually delivering better prosperity, better life chances for people and their families. And from talking to people in Birmingham, I've included some of the voices there at the end of the film.
Brum says no.
At best, they're saying what's levelling up, or it probably won't happen because the southeast always gets all the money. It's not going to change.
Yeah. But I mean, these manufacturers, these firms that you talk to, I mean, clearly it's the input costs that are really hitting them, the energy, the supply side of the raw materials they need, and therefore key is what happens to inflation. Looking at this 18 months towards a general election, clearly the political decision's been made by the government. Let's try and wait as long as possible in the hope that that inflation figure comes down. Where are we with the runes on that? Because we were thinking maybe we'd be below double figures by now, and we're not.
So the latest inflation number, as you know, Mark, for February was 10.4. Yeah. It was quite a surprise that it went up from 10.1 in January. Yeah. The next inflation number for March comes out next Wednesday, and you and I will be sitting here talking about it, no doubt. It will probably be in single digits. It'll probably be below 10%. I think what a lot of manufacturers feel, and the manufacturer I spoke to there, Tony Haig from PP in Walsall, a very, very successful company. Yep. What Tony Haig was saying, he doesn't see any, in no uncertain terms, he said, I don't see any evidence of levelling up. I think he literally said, I think it's a joke. And he's a very serious local business leader. He's employing over 100 people there in his company. It's a very successful company. And he's saying that a lot of companies he knows, his energy bills are actually OK because he's got a lot of different contracts and different sources. But he said a lot of companies in the region are really suffering from high energy bills now that government support with energy bills has completely disappeared, unless you're a really energy-intensive user like a steelmaker or something. And he's also saying that rising corporation tax is hitting companies hard because it means in some cases they won't do much additional investment. Their margins are being squeezed. So, look, unless business sentiment improves, the economy is not going to grow in a meaningful way.
There's no engine.
And unless the economy grows in a meaningful way, then the government's fortunes are not going to improve. They're going to stay behind the Labour Party, pretty much whatever Keir Starmer and his team do or don't do. This is the reality of how economics impacts politics. It drives politics. Yeah. And I think there's no policy that's more important to this government than levelling up. And so on the evidence of the film that we just ran there, the government's got work to do.
Yeah. Liam, as ever, thank you for that. And as you say, next Wednesday, the next sort of big day, indeed. I'm on holiday. Anyway, now, a national day of protest in France. The campaign concerning the pension changes continuing. Day 12, indeed, of action. President Macron and his bypassing of Parliament by the executive authority raised the pension age from 62 to 64, met by outrage from various Labour unions and campaigners. Well, it shows no sign of backing down, indeed intensifying in some areas, particularly the transport union. We saw Gare de Lyon in Paris today hit by action. Let's now speak to Anne-Elisabeth Moutet, who's a French journalist and columnist, joining us from Paris. And there were pretty dramatic scenes in the Gare de Lyon earlier, Anne-Elisabeth, and an indication that this is not going away for Macron in any sense.
Oh, absolutely. Not only is it not going away, but everybody knows that the Constitutional Council will rule tomorrow, Friday, on whether the bill is actually constitutional and whether it's got to be altered or cancelled or passed through. And nobody really knows what the answer is. But there's also a possibility that the Constitutional Council will rule that there are enough MPs, 270, and you only need 180, who requested a national referendum. And if the court decides that that is also constitutional, which probably it is, in that case, the bill should be put to a referendum in France. And that means that there will be 9 months in which the bill would be suspended, while they try to get 4 million signatures to say yes or no as it goes. And it's very likely that there will be twice as many to say, no, we don't like this bill, in which case Macron might be facing 9 months of waiting, which is terrible for him.
Yeah, a humiliation. But clearly, in terms of re-election, he doesn't have to worry about that. And he is now in his second term, and he's indicated publicly he's not worried about his personal popularity being dented in any way.
Well, it's not making him more popular when he says that, because from the start of this reaction to his bill, he has been so obstinate, and he's refused to talk to the unions himself. And in general, he said, I'm just going to pass this through, and it's just sort of lighting a fire under the sort of the united front of refusal to this. It's not such a massive reform, but it's a reform that people think is badly written, and they also feel that there's more than that. It's also a vote of no confidence in him.
And talking of lighting fires, what is the state in terms of the capital particularly? As I said, we saw these scenes earlier today, as we did last week, near that restaurant La Rotonde, I think, in Montparnasse. Gare de Lyon today, it shows no sign of settling down. And these are union members as well as the disaffected, one might believe.
These are not union members. And in the first 2 months of the year, January and February, you had 8 days of action that were organized every week by the unions. And what was characteristic about that and unusual was that there was no violence whatsoever. And there had been increasingly a toleration of violence in the past 2 decades in France. But there you had the sort of the unions' security services themselves. They have people ensuring security, and they were very good about this. And when the feeling was that the president was going to go anywhere, you started having those disaffected people who came in, and they came to break things and burn things.
Yeah. OK, and clearly the political situation may actually engender yet more protest if the calls for that referendum are not met. But we should keep people updated. Anne Elizabeth, for the moment in Paris, thank you very much indeed. Now, let's return to our shores and talk about the plans to reduce housing pressure on tourist hotspots, because second homeowners could be forced to seek planning permission, no less, to start renting out their properties as holiday lets. Well, the move comes as a surge in holiday home ownership in hotspots such as Devon or Cornwall being blamed for pricing out local people and leaving homes empty for much of the year. Well, someone whose village has changed a lot with the so-called out-of-towners is musician Sam Richardson, who joins us now. Sam, thanks for your time. We can see you celebrating Cornwall behind you there with that GWR poster, but it's caused a few problems, not just Cornwall, Devon and other areas as well.
It has. I actually recently been on a national tour all around the UK, playing in some beautiful theatres, and people from the most northern reaches of our country down to the most southern reaches of our country, the big cities to the small little towns, it seemed to be the same old story. So yeah, certainly beyond the shores of Cornwall.
And just to sort of talk through the various problems, I mean, clearly there are those people who believe this is good for many coastal communities because it brings money in, the cafes have got customers, and it gets the local economy moving.
I mean, there's certainly an argument to be made for that, but I think that there is certainly a balance point that was, picked up a long time ago. We're finding that a lot of our local eateries and pubs are having to just close up through the winter completely because there's no trade. Because so many houses are occupied for only a couple of months every year, which is it's hard to see, and it is difficult as well because that has a knock-on effect of less decent, well-paying jobs that are full-time for local people, which would, I suppose, in turn help them possibly get the property ladder.
Yeah, so it's just a seasonal effect, the seasonal labour during the summer. How has it affected you personally then?
Well, it's one of those things. Being a musician, I think home ownership is still a good while off for me, but which is fine. That's a
yeah.
But I've certainly seen a lot of my childhood friends who've got really decent jobs, well paid, really struggle to be able to find anywhere that's affordable for them to stay. And I've also seen like a lot of people that have the families lived in the villages for tens of generations, and they're having to now leave. Where they grow up because they can't keep up with the prices, they can't keep up with rental prices because there's so many people can make so much more money out of short-term holiday lets. It's really tragic to see the effect that it has.
Yeah, and clearly, indications perhaps there are now companies involved in buying up properties to rent them as Airbnbs. But do you think the local authorities have failed as well in providing enough social housing for these various communities?
Yeah, I mean, social housing in Cornwall's a pretty tragic state. We've got, from what I heard on Radio 4 the other day, we've got one of the most in-demand counties in all of the UK for council accommodation and social housing, and one of the smallest housing stock available for that.
Yeah.
it's tens and tens of thousands of people, if I'm not mistaken, which is hard. It's hard to see.
Yeah, it's a sad song. There we go. But thank you for updating us with your view, and a great poster. We're very impressed with that. Thank you very much indeed. Now, let's return from Cornwall to Ireland, where the beast, yes, is still there waiting outside Farmley House because US President Joe Biden is still meeting the Taoiseach, the Prime Minister Leo Varadkar, talking through the various issues of Northern Ireland, we're being told. Yes, the Good Friday Agreement and indeed Ukraine. So matters of political substance on the table before the President heads to Leinster House for the joint session of both Houses of Parliament there in Dublin. And we're being told he will address this question of moving the peace process or the political process in terms of power sharing forward. We're being told that the Sinn Féin leader from Stormont will be there, as will the former leader or president of Sinn Féin, Gerry Adams, who will be in that audience for that speech. What we don't know, because the timetable has slipped, is whether the president will enjoy the youngsters with a display of Gaelic sports. That might be off the agenda. We shall update you in Patrick's programme on that next, but stay with us here for all the latest on GB News.
Hello, I'm Mark Wilson from the Met Office, and it stays rather changeable across the UK through the rest of this working week, with a mixture of sunshine and showers, some heavier rain affecting many southern counties on Friday, but for most areas, winds will be lighter. We look at the pressure pattern then, you can see the reason why. Low pressure very much dominates our weather through Thursday into Friday as well. Keep an eye on this weather front approaching from the west, and that will bring that heavier, more persistent rain that I mentioned. So through the rest of Thursday into the evening and overnight, we still hang on to some shower outbreaks of rain across parts of Scotland, North East England as well. Elsewhere, though, across much of Northern Ireland, England and Wales, turning drier and clearer, one or two mist and fog patches. And under those clear skies, it will turn quite chilly. Temperatures in towns and cities hovering just above freezing, but in rural spots falling just below. So a touch of frost for many of us. But towards the southwest, though, thicker cloud and outbreaks of rain spreading through the night, so that bit milder here. So quite a wet start to the morning across much of the southwest, just fringing into South Wales as well. And that rain will spread across many southern counties through the morning. Some quite strong and gusty winds towards the south coast as well. Elsewhere, though, across many central and northern parts of the country, there will be some brightness, but that will spark off some heavy and frequent showers with the risk of hail and thunder as well. And with lighter winds, those showers will be quite slow moving too. Temperatures again fairly disappointing for the time of the year, highs of 10 to 12 degrees. Now, as we head through the rest of Friday into the evening and overnight, we hang on to a fair few showers towards the east, some heavier, more persistent rain affecting the southeastern corner for a time as well, but turning drier and